Good evening, everyone. It is good to have you with us tonight, whether you're here live in our chambers, watching on ACTV, Charter Channel 180, or on accgov.com online. We are here at Athens-Clarke City Hall for 3 meetings this evening. First, we're going to have a Solid Waste Management Authority of Athens-Clarke meeting to consider an approval related to our landfill. Next, we'll have a special called session by the full mayor and commission. And then finally, we'll have our regularly scheduled agenda-setting session. So we're going to begin again with our Solid Waste Management Authority meeting, for which we do not need to call roll. We're here to consider financing for construction of the Athens-Clarke Landfill Phase V and other items in proper order. First order of business is election of officers. I, Kelly Gertz, will serve as chairman. David Boyd, Athens-Clarke Finance Director, will serve as Secretary Treasurer, and I believe that Commissioner Davenport has agreed to serve as Vice Chairman. And so I would entertain a motion for election of officers.
So moved.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion from Allison Wright, a second from Mariah Parker for election of that slate of officers. Any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, so officers have been elected unanimously. We have time now for public input. Public input on landfill activities will be conducted in the same process as our standard public input. 3 minutes for any member of the audience who wishes to speak. When you have 30 seconds remaining, the light in front of Clerk Spratlin will turn yellow. When your time is up, it will turn red. So go ahead and entertain any interest from the public in speaking on this matter.
Good evening, Mayor, Commission. My name is Diane Dunstan, and when I hear landfill, I think about those beautiful individuals who live on the Dunlap Road, and I can't speak for them, but we have heard that there are still individuals who don't have clean water after 20, 30 years of promises. So as you consider the landfill proposals, please think about the citizens who are still being poisoned in Athens-Clarke County, and that there is a responsibility of our elected officials to look out for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dunstan. Any other input this evening from the public on our Solid Waste Management Authority meeting? All right, I'll move for discussion and approval of the resolution and related documents for the construction loan related to Phase 5 of the landfill. Any commission input on this item?
Move to approve.
Do I hear a second? All right, I have a motion from Commissioner Edwards, a second from Commissioner Neesmith to approve the resolution and related documents, item 5 on this agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. We're going to go ahead and adjourn then the Solid Waste Management Authority meeting.
So moved.
And we're going to move on to our special called session, for which Clerk Spratlin needs to provide a roll call for us.
Davenport.
Here.
Parker. Here. Link.
Here.
Wright.
Present.
Denson.
Here.
Naismith.
Present.
Edwards.
Here.
Harrod.
Present.
Thornton. Here. Hamby.
Here.
We have 4.
Okay. All right. We first have a public hearing. It's our second public hearing on the proposed FY20 budget as required by the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, passed by the Georgia General Assembly, and financing for the landfill Phase 5 construction, and a resolution for the clean and renewable energy public hearing on SPLOST 2020 and other items. We're going to begin with public hearing number 2 on the proposed FY20 budget. And so any member in the chamber this evening who would like to speak to our proposed budget, now is time for your 3 minutes to speak specifically to the budget. And again, just provide your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes when your time begins.
My name is Chris Dowd. I live at 188 Northview Drive. I'm just hoping that we can find the money to pay, all of our, workers in the county, including inmates, for their labor, even if it's just a small amount. I think it's really important that we do that. It's just kind of a shame that, we live in one of the states that allows this to happen, one of the very few states that does. So I think we need to move beyond that. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dowd. Other input on our budget this evening?
Hi, I'm Paula Loniak. I live in Oglethorpe County, and I'm not sure if this is where I should be putting my 2 cents in or not, but this is a little confusing with
This
the
is
different...
regarding our budget for fiscal year 2020.
Yeah, okay. Well, actually, originally I was going to just give you information that I pulled out of the Envision Athens from 2017, their reports that they did for all of us, but then I realized you guys have all that information, and then I decided to tell about, after attending all the sorts of meetings and getting involved with the comp plan in 2018 and sending emails and giving out written hard copies of articles pertaining to what I think the direction that development in Athens-Clarke County should go, I still don't feel like I'm being informed. I've been educating you about tiny houses, what they are, where they're already thriving, and how they could be an asset to Athens, but I'm still in the dark about what you've done. And if you're listening and considering what I've said and submitted, and maybe even planning to act on something I'd like to see happen, I get up to the podium, I speak for my 3 minutes, and I don't know what happens next. Do you guys take any notes? Do you discuss what I or others have said? When I look at the records for Athens-Clarke County meetings and comp plans before 2018, I see that more affordable housing has been a goal for at least the past 20-plus years, and I've got to wonder, are you listening? Do you think my vision for tiny house communities in Athens-Clarke County is never going to happen? If so, why doesn't somebody pull me aside and say, hey, Paula, stop wasting your time and breath? Because I do devote a lot of time to this for the past 4 years. I think I've raised awareness, but that doesn't matter if nothing changes. I imagine moving to a place where you really, really like and think, this is where I want to live, and everything you've loved about it was just great. But then, after about 20 years, changes started happening, and very quickly, your place has changed so much that you weren't even sure if you really, really liked it. But it didn't seem to matter, and it seems like the people that are responsible for making those changes aren't really that caring about the situation. That's kind of how I feel. I feel like I've spoken about it, but it doesn't seem to make a difference. So I'm not sure if that pertains to FY20, but that's why I was here to speak to you today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Loniak. Any further input specifically on our 2020 budget? That would be associated with the 2020 budget. Yes, ma'am. The revenue side of the balance sheet.
Hi, my name is Angie McElhennon. I live at 144 Bobley, just right in Bogarts. I've become disabled at work trying to get to a code 99, fell on the stairs, ended up in the hospital, had 4 surgeries, and was fired on the 4th surgery. So now I'm on disability. My father is 80 years old, and our property tax keep rising. Nothing that we have, nothing that we can do is going to give us any more money. So we're kind of wondering, where's all this extra money that you guys want from us coming from? You can't get blood from a turnip, as they say. I'm not having any raises. The last time I went to one of these meetings, it was based on the fact that you needed to give raises to police, which they deserve. But there has to be some other way to come to a compromise than making the homeowners of Clarke County pay for everything. Businesses have been leaving. UGA is getting bigger, and they're not paying any taxes. My father has paid for all of us kids to go to school. I've never had kids. 80% of this property tax is for kids to get to school. Most of the people who have kids going to school live in apartments, and they're not paying. So that's not it's weird to say it's not fair, but it's not. You just can't keep draining us because we don't have any money, we don't have anything else to give. And that's all I've got to say.
Thanks, Ms. McLehan. Other speakers specifically regarding the fiscal year 2020 budget? All right, seeing none, we'll come behind the rail. Any commission conversation regarding the 2020 budget at this point? Okay, we're going to move on to citizen input on new business. So this regards the proposed landfill Phase V construction loan and our resolution to adopt 100% clean and renewable energy goals. So, any citizen input on these two items? Construction loan or clean energy? Again, just provide your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
Carol Myers, 260 Spalding Circle. Just a few quick words. Think globally, act locally has always made sense to me, a guiding force, and that's why I am so proud of what we're doing tonight as a community with the adoption of a resolution, or hopefully the adoption of a resolution, to make Athens 100% clean and renewable. Climate change is an existential crisis for our global community. Some may wonder if what we do in Athens will make a difference because the problem's so big, but there is no one solution to this crisis. If we all wait until the big solution comes along, there won't be much of a future for our children and the many species affected by our putting too much carbon into the atmosphere. We have to act locally while having faith and hope that the actions of concerned citizens, communities, businesses, and industries around this planet of ours will add up to saving the planet and slowing down climate change as much as is possible. But, other than that, that's better than taking a fatalistic approach and doing nothing. As a member of 100% Athens, as an Athenian, as one of 7.7 billion people on this earth, thank you, Mayor Gertz, commissioners, and the Director of Sustainability Office, Andrew Saunders, for giving me hope and for moving with speed to get this resolution passed with speed, a repeated word, and with concern for equity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Myers.
Good evening, Deborah Gonzalez. I reside at 212 McHenry Drive, Athens, Georgia. Good evening, Mayor Gertz, esteemed commissioners, and all who are here participating in this discussion, whether in this room or online. I come before you to give you just some brief comments in support of the 100% clean and renewable energy resolution that you will be voting on tonight. You have already been presented with the scientific evidence, benefits, costs, and numerous examples of how this is working positively in cities across our nation and in our country, so I will not take any more time to review those again. But I will speak simply about what this resolution means to the people of Athens-Clarke County. Adopting this resolution means that the health for Athens-Clarke County residents and visitors who make up a significant source of revenue for our county. It means monthly savings for residents and vendors, especially for our economically disadvantaged residents who can use that savings on other things, including building prosperity. It means providing opportunities for jobs and economic development through workforce training and entrepreneurship, perhaps Athens even becoming a clean tech hub. It means children playing in an environment safe of asthma-causing debris and adults breathing air, fresh air, as they go about their daily lives, extending those very lives due to less respiratory diseases. It has always been my belief that Athens as a city and Clarke as a county could be a leader for the rest of the state on many different levels. It is one of the reasons I took such pride in representing it at the Capitol. Clean energy is one of those projects. When you pass this resolution, what you're actually saying is that you're making more than just a promise based on values, but that you're making a commitment with every intention of actually getting something done. Athens is already off to a great start, investing in clean energy bus transportation and putting this resolution on the table. So I thank you for your consideration of this proposal, and I wholeheartedly ask you to vote for and adopt the 100% clean and renewable energy resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Other speakers on new business?
Good evening. Sorry. My name is Cole Zaylers, and I'm a senior. I'm a recent graduate of Clark Central High School, and I want to talk to you about the sustainable energy. Last year in my environmental science class, we watched a documentary about Georgetown, Texas, a town that switched to 100% sustainable. And afterwards, we were all wondering, where is Athens on this? What are we doing as a town? And every student, and then what they told us was that it's not yet on the table at the time, but we're all very proud to live in Athens. We're all very surprised that a date had not been set yet. But I'm very glad that it's on the table now, and I know that many youth in the community are very glad too. Thank you.
Thank you. Cole, can you spell your last name for me real quick for the record?
Yes. Ehlers.
Ehlers, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming tonight. Other folks who'd like to speak on our special called session, new business? All right, we'll come behind the rail. I know we had some text and then kind of slight modification that Commissioner Denson brought forward. Commissioner Denson, if you want to begin discussion.
Sure. I made just a couple of suggestions in my version here. One, specifically addressing that black and brown communities here in Athens are going to experience the economic, environmental, and health and social harm of climate change disproportionately. And I think it's important that we explicitly say that and recognize that in our language. And the other item I had was for us to also recommend that we divest our investments locally as a municipality, but also in our pension and retirement funds, divest away from fossil fuel companies. I think this is important. In 2014, municipal holdings had about $1.5 trillion and about $500 billion of retirement funds. So that's a lot of money that's being invested into our economy. And I think it's important that not only do our operational policies become greener, but that our investments, are not also supporting industries that are driving climate change. So I think that this goes along with what we're trying to do as a resolution, but kind of is a little bit more encompassing, making sure that, we're putting our money where our mouth is.
And I apologize to everybody. I'm actually addressing new business out of order. We'll continue conversation about the 100% clean and renewable energy goals, but this is new business item 2, and we'll circle back to item 1. Commissioner Parker.
I was going to speak to that as well, so I can hold on if you'd
Okay.
like.
Commissioner Link.
I'll wait too. Sorry.
All right. Any other commission input?
I think there's some confusion. Are we going to continue the discussion of the resolution?
We're going to continue discussion of item number 2, the resolution to adopt 100% clean and renewable energy goals.
Sorry, I just wanted to make clear.
No.
Okay.
Go right
So I wanted to speak in support of Commissioner Denson's amendments to the resolution as was presented to us at the work session last week. I think the research is clear that black and brown communities are most heavily impacted both by energy burden and the impacts of disasters that are related to climate change. And so making sure that we're protecting these communities and also empowering these communities to be at the forefront of changes in industry that are going to help spur this along as we incorporate more clean and renewable energy into the way our community operates. I'm really excited for and really appreciative of all the community stakeholders who have worked so hard to bring this before us. I did want to make one additional change to the language that Commissioner Denson has added here, furthering his goal of clarity about the communities we want to ensure are prioritized within this effort. So where it says, whereas at both a national and local level, household income, home ownership status, race, and age are historically correlated with the likelihood that a household will spend more of its total income on energy expenses. Therefore, it is imperative that we prioritize these communities with policies and programs to decrease their energy burden through adoption of sustainable and renewable technologies. So where it says these communities, I wanted to specify again what we mean by these, because raced communities could be kind of vague, but if we were to instead substitute these with low-income, black, brown, and senior communities, I think that captures some of the language included in the first half of that statement, just to ensure that, again, we are re-emphasizing the importance of ensuring that these communities are not further marginalized by this work. And we'll kick it back over to Commissioner Denson and see if that's cool.
So you'd simply replace the
Do you want me to
The
read
word-
it?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
So I think I've got it. So after the word prioritize, replace the word these with low-income, Black, brown, and senior communities.
Yeah.
I'll adopt that language and move that we adopt the resolution with those changes.
I second.
So I've got a motion from Commissioner Denson, second from Commissioner Parker. Other commission input? Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I just want to applaud this resolution and state that I really look forward to us implementing it. You know, a resolution is one thing, but implementation is a whole nother thing. And as we move forward with some pretty big projects and programs, especially when we talk about a prosperity package, when we talk about an affordable housing package, I look forward to coming up with creative and effective ways to actually include renewable energy in these projects and also in retrofitting our existing buildings. I noticed that solar panels got installed on the Classic Center recently, so that's exciting. So I just really look forward to keeping this in mind with every step we take.
Other commission input on this item?
I'll say
Commissioner
something,
Hamby?
Mayor, if you don't mind, and just to sort of piggyback on what Commissioner Link said, you know, the resolution is one thing, the implementation is the other, and certainly there's a lot of folks here who supported the renewable SPLOST project that we'll be discussing here shortly or at some point in time, and so just wanted to point that out, that's a big component. A lot of communities pass a resolution, but, you know, fall by the wayside when it comes to implementation, and by having this as a SPLOST project and some other things that certainly Andrew Saunders, our environmental sustainability, what do we call him these days?
Sustainability.
Office of Sustainability, there you go, is doing is very helpful. So at any rate, thanks for bringing that up, Commissioner Link.
Other commission input on this item? Commissioner Denson?
One more thing, and to piggyback on that, I also want to thank all of the residents and citizens of Athens who pitched in to make this happen, a lot of them being here in this room. I think this resolution, along with other things that are on the agenda, shows how important and beneficial it is whenever this body and our local government works hand in hand with the residents of Athens to actually create policy and empower the people in their own government and policy making. And I think that this is a beautiful and fantastic example of that, and hopefully just the first step as we move forward implementing it.
All right, before the vote, I just want to reiterate thanks, particularly to Andrew Saunders and all the Athens-Clarke County staff who've spent some time on this and who've committed to spending time mapping out what the road ahead is going to look like. And more than anything, thank community members who've continued to push for this kind of work that I think are going to be critical to the generation of Mr. Ehlers who spoke with us tonight and all those who follow. So with that, we have a motion from Commissioner Denson, a second from Commissioner Parker. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? All right, fabulous. We're going to move back to new business item number 1, the proposed landfill Phase V construction loan. That's item number 1 on your special called session agenda.
I move that we accept option 1, A and B.
Second.
All right, have a motion from Commissioner Wright, have a second from Commissioner Edwards. Any other commission input on this item? Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I want to briefly bring up the concerns about the water for the residents near the landfill. I understand that residents within a certain radius of the landfill have been put on city water. I'm curious if there's been any more recent testing for those outside that radius. I'd like to maybe suggest that we look into that issue.
I can mention Commissioner Link, and I think the management team may be able to kind of highlight some more detail that the decades ago, many residents were put on city water at no cost to them. So, if you're a homeowner and you build a new home, typically you pay a hookup fee, and those folks paid no hookup fee. and that part of our ongoing monitoring involves several testing wells throughout the region. I don't know if Assistant Managers Johnson or Lonan, you want to highlight any other activities going on there?
Sure, but more specifically, 23 homeowners have been placed on city water, and we'll find out if there are any future additional plans outside of the original scope of what happened a few years ago.
So this landfill straddles Athens-Clarke and Oglethorpe County. Has Oglethorpe County attended to any folks on that side of the border, or do we know if?
We do have an intergovernmental agreement with Oglethorpe County, and when this land was purchased, I believe the land was purchased in 2007 or 8, but then plans were developed in 2009 and 10, and during that era, there was a federally required body that included many citizens and residents of the area that were at the table that I served on as a unified government representative, along with former Deputy County Manager Bob Snipes. And so many of those Oglethorpe County residents sat around the table for several months.
I'd just like some information on how often these wells are tested and maybe where some of the locations are, and any background information.
And I know relatively recently, I've gotten a map of those in the last couple of years, so I know that's something staff
That
can
would
usually
be
produce.
helpful.
Yeah, Commissioner Thornton.
I'm going to probably support this, but we had 23 houses, did you say? Is that all the houses, or is just, are there some others that need to hook up?
Research and find out the total number that needs to, but as it stands right now, there are only 23 that were hooked up.
Okay, so my next question is, if I vote yes for this, how are we going to be sure those houses, if there are any, are going to be taken care of and taken care of properly? That's my question. I mean, there's nothing in the works or being recommended for giving, in the hookup, right?
I think it'd be helpful to see the history and the map of adjacent residences in conjunction with a map of both those residents who've received pro bono city water hookups, as well as the kind of outline of citizen and governmental agreements that came out of that 2010 body. There were several considerations that were provided for particularly the Oglethorpe County residents who would be immediately adjacent to the expansion area.
Well, I'm still struggling with that, Mayor. I think, for me personally, I would love to know that everybody has the hookup, so that they cannot continue. I probably am not going to vote for this now, but I really feel as though we should be able to say how many houses are out there, how many houses have the hookup, and how many houses don't. I'm really uncomfortable because if this has been going on this long, I don't think we're doing our due diligence. That just seems to me a really simple thing that we should know as commissioners.
Yeah, and that information's been conveyed to commissioners relatively recently, but I think staff can probably get all that for you. Commissioner Davenport hasn't spoken yet, and then Commissioner Wright.
Yeah, so 99% of the people who live on Dunlap are my family. Unfortunately, we have some relatives who don't want city water because they don't want that city water bill. So I know my pastor and family have been trying to get them on city water. So unfortunately, there are those who just don't want to pay that ACC water bill. But my question is, are we extending water lines to Oglethorpe County for the Oglethorpe County residents to have water?
Managers?
From what I understand, that's not the purpose.
Okay.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, I just wanted to share some stuff that I thought was related to our discussions about some of this before. It would have been, Commissioner Link, that when you were here, but not with the new group, it was my understanding that the water supply and the hookup for those 20, that group that we know of, was related to when it was the older version of a landfill. Our new versions of landfills have the linings and the triple linings and the testing and the different things, managers help me out here with, that don't have that leaching that was a previous version. We learned a little, can you help us understand some of the differences in before and
That's
the
right,
current?
and that's absolutely correct. And so there's some different methodology and technologies that have been used with the expansion of the new phase. And at this point, we're about 80% complete with the project. So this is a continuation to go ahead and finish the project. But you are correct. So with the new liners that have been in place that were constructed a couple of months ago, we're at a place where about 80% complete of the entire project. So there were some extenuating circumstances with the last phase that had to be addressed, as well as the leachate management piece, which is a part of a solid waste mission to address with Georgia EPD.
And just to note some of your queries, Commissioner Wright, there was a set of federal landfill regulations implemented in the 1970s that are commonly referred to as Subtitle D regulations, and those were the regulations that required that there be lining at all. Pre-mid-70s, landfills were generally constructed without lining at all, and simply leaching happened from that material that was landfilled into the ground. And now there's very substantial lining that includes rubber and clay and a piping system so that liquid material can circulate out of the landfill. So the things are very different now than they were in the past. Commissioner Davenport?
But I still think that the county should at least, in due diligence, take care of the residents who do, from this point on, decide, hey, I want to get city hookup, just to go ahead and take care of that. And that's what I would recommend.
I'm confused.
So it sounds like commissioners would like some additional information about the specifics of the residencies that are surrounding the landfill, those that have been provided with service. I think it'd be beneficial to see the elements of the outcome of the 2010 resident agreement that includes both some Clark and some Oglethorpe residents. Oglethorpe more significantly in this case because the expansion segment is completely in Oglethorpe. That would probably provide everybody a grounding for understanding.
Yes.
But it's time sensitive. That's why we have this called meeting.
This is time
for this
sensitive.
process to move forward, to continue on the schedule that we need. Is that correct?
With the loan, and this does not preclude any other community supports that this body sees as viable. Commissioner Davenport.
So this is just to propose, what we're talking about just for a loan.
Correct.
But can we direct staff to reach out to the people at Dunlap Road and find out the residents who potentially want to have city hookup?
What I'd recommend is take a look at the history of what's happened over the last couple of decades, and then that'll give us some direction as to what specific steps we would want to take now.
I know the history, so I would like for us to at least get staff to just take a look at the residents who are out there. There's a lot of elderly people who just don't pay attention, and they like it quiet and peaceful. But I would just love for staff to just maybe reach out to them and say, hey, you're still on well water, and we would love for you to get on city water. I just think it's just the right thing to do. That's just me.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a reasonable measure. I can see why, 30, 40 years ago, folks didn't want to get on city water. But things might have changed now, and I would bet that those wells are impacted by that old landfill. I would like to see some follow-up done with those folks who are within that area who might have rejected that agreement once upon a time.
Would someone like to, Commissioner Neesmith?
Yeah, I mean, I support the concept very much, but I think what we need to do is understand the potential impact area of the leaching or the contamination of well water. So it might be great. It might be beyond Dunlap Road. So I think, and we have test wells, so we need to see the evidence that's in the test wells as to where leaching has occurred and it's affected groundwater. And that way we can maybe reach out further than Dunlap Road if we need to. If we don't need to, that's fine. But I think your idea is a good one. But I think we need to inform ourselves, make sure we're covering the whole territory that we need to.
Commissioner Thornton.
I think it's a good idea because I'm a people person myself. So if you roll out a map, I may or may not understand it. But I don't see why we can't do both. I don't see why we cannot get educated on the whole scope of it and still reach out to those families out there just to make sure, you know, they understand. And I thought I turned my phone off. But I really would like for us to, Dunlap has been a problem since the 80s. So I really want to make sure that we reach out to that group of families. And if it means we got to go out there and talk to some folk, I don't understand why that's. I'm going to vote for the proposal for the loan, but I would like for Commissioner Davenport's recommendation to be considered that we reach out to the community.
And I'm going to call on Commissioner Hamby in just a second, but one thing you may want to consider, just to be specific about what the request is a re-engagement with those members of the area that previously had been offered city water and declined that service, just to kind of define the world of engagement that we're talking about in a clearer way than out there.
Yeah.
Commissioner Hamby?
And I don't know if a motion has been made, but I'll make a motion to approve the loan with also what you just said about re-engaging the citizens around there to see what happens, and perhaps put on the radar a future work session on this so that everybody understands the history and what's been done and what's being done. So, so that's the motion there.
And I'll second it if.
That would be a substitute motion.
Okay.
I'll make that as a substitute motion.
A friendly amendment?
Friendly amendment.
Friendly amendment.
Do you need a second on a friendly amendment?
Do the original motion and second accept that as a replacement for their original motion? So this would be to adopt the resolution authorizing an intergovernmental agreement, authorize the mayor and appropriate staff to execute all related documents, and re-engage with those community members that had been previously offered city water connections, but had declined that at the time.
Yes.
So motion and second are fine with that?
It's Mike and Avita's.
Sounds good. We're good. We're good.
It's good.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, all opposed? All right, excellent. Thanks, everyone.
Here we go.
All right, we are moving on to item F on our special called session, which is the public hearing on proposed SPLOST 2020 items. We're at the point now where the Citizen Advisory Committee has recommended a SPLOST package, and the mayor and commission will now take up any amendments to that citizen recommendation. But we would like to hear from the citizenry about any input that they would like to provide, either on those items that were recommended or were not. So time now for citizen input on SPLOST 2020.
More, part two. Carol Myers, 260 Spalding Circle. I'm a member of the steering committee for 100% Athens. I have a simple and short message. Thank you to the SPLOST 2020 Citizens Committee, many of you who are out here tonight, for recognizing the importance of the 100% Athens movement and resolution in compiling their submitted project list. The 100% resolution you commissioners just passed is monumental, but without funding, as Commissioner Hamby said, that resolution is just words. Project 51, the Renewable Energy Program, Project 52, the Sustainability Investment Program, and Project 84, 100% Athens Energy Sustainability Program, puts our money where our mouths are. With the projects funded through these programs, Athens will become a leader in the 100% renewable movement. Yes, 131 other cities have committed to 100% renewables, but not many have made the dollar investment that Athens will be making with the inclusion of these projects in SPLOST 2020. We're a big football town, proud of our Bulldog victories, but I am much more proud that we will be leaders in the race to transition to 100% renewables. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Other input on SPLOST 2020?
My name's Gordon Roden. I live at 340 Heather Cove off of Tallahassee Road. I'm here tonight to address the Tallahassee Forest Project. Don't know of any commissioners who have come through our neighborhood asking us what we think about the project. I have spoken to my commissioner, Jerry Neesmith. I think part of my concern, being a resident there for 20 years, we built a house 20 years ago out there, is a concern about opening up the pristine property that is there. What will it do to the pristine property that is there? The concern about the restrooms that will be located there and so on and so forth, and wanted to know if the commission has addressed security for that property, not just for the entrance, but for the 310 acres that will open up there. That is a great concern to those of us who live there. There are 2 subdivisions, and then, of course, Bernie Harris right across the street. I think another concern for me personally about the SPLOST in general is that in our community, we are so focused on the indigent and helping those in need. And I know the 1% SPLOST is going to get every one of those people that come to game day in Athens. You know, it's a way to get money from the university students and so on and so forth. But every poverty-stricken person in this community is going to pay that 1% every time they buy a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk. So my concern is for the general well-being for our community, as well as where we live, off of Tallahassee Road. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Roden. Other citizen input on SPLOST 2020.
Thank you. I'm Diane Dunstan. We had a big community meeting last evening, the community agenda, and heard a great deal about the SPLOST projects 2020. Many of them would be here tonight because they didn't know and didn't hear about this meeting on last night. But as those of us who found out, we made sure that we were here to say that we understand that much of the impoverished community will be impacted greatly by the SPLOST, and that there's not a lot in the projects to help the community. We did, and we are excited about the Gaines School project, and want the collaboration with the school district as we try to do what we need to do for our Black and brown, red and white children, especially those who are not being educated and suffering. So as you consider, and we still have to vote in November, let us make sure that we don't just throw out brown and black and impoverished and give a little bit of prosperity, some crumbs to the dogs, and consider the big picture. We can do better. We can do more. We do want to be at the table. There are some of us who, no, none of us are perfect, but some of us get labeled and never can redeem ourselves, and many of our youth are suffering because of that. We want a great community for those who come after us, and that's why I'm here. Please, do put your money where your mouth is. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Dunstan. Other citizen input on SPLOST 2020.
Good evening, folks. My name's Ross Watson. I live at 430 Sandstone Drive. Andy's our commissioner. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. I had the opportunity to also attend the SPLOST meeting. I believe it was on Thursday night, okay? And I had a lot of my questions answered, but some of them weren't. And so I'd like to address a couple of those now, and maybe someone can get back via the website or something, let us know. And they're mostly about the mayor and commissioner's mandated projects. We have a space modernization program, which was fully explained in the attachment and all the history on that particular item, which is item number 5. Item number 58 was the Athens-Clarke County Affordable Housing for $44,500,000. This is an unbelievably complex problem, not only in Athens, but in this country, okay? And I know there's been a lot of creative conversations going on, not only here, but at the water fountain, you might say, and elsewhere about, what is the right trend? What is the right direction to go? Well, I'm here to tell you, I don't know. But I do know one thing. I hope that whatever we do, that investment will be available for U.S. citizens only. Secondly, there was, in the mandated projects, there was $21 million worth of debt service. I asked that question, and I couldn't really get an answer from a couple of the members of the Citizen Advisory Committee that I thought made sense. And I didn't have a chance to talk to, I believe the gentleman's name is Keith, the manager for SPLOST, is that correct? So I haven't been able to get to him, but I would like to see that, that the SPLOST organization put out an explanation on what is that debt service of $21 million. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Other citizen input tonight on SPLOST 2020.
Mayor Gertz, Commissioners, my name is Joan Sheldon. I live at 365 Brookstone Drive. On behalf of the Friends of Bear Hollow, I urge you to fund Project 60, a complete rebuild of Bear Hollow Wildlife Trail. This facility has not seen major infrastructure investment since the 1980s. The buildings are at the end of their expected lifespan, and the facility is in critical need of new fencing, electric, water, sewer, and erosion control measures throughout the zoo, as well as new amenities that the public expects, such as restrooms within the zoo. In 2017, the county held public visioning sessions that asked, what activities and amenities would you like to see in the park in 10 years? The resulting 2018 master plan for Memorial Park and Bear Hollow is the basis and the justification for Project 60. The public has let you know what they want this facility to be. But if we do not invest now, what will this facility be like in 10 more years? In just 5 days, we, the Friends of Bear Hollow, have collected 195 signatures to a letter urging you to support Project 60. 71 of these are from Clarke County, 67 from the surrounding counties, 42 from the rest of Georgia, and 15 visitors from out of state. Bear Hollow is a regional destination recommended by travel guides such as TripAdvisor, and surely these out-of-town visitors are also customers at area restaurants and other businesses while they are here. Last year, 85 school groups visited on field trips to learn about our native wildlife at the zoo, and zoo special events can draw 1,000 visitors in a single day. It is easy to see why the Northeast Georgia Regional Commission named Bear Hollow a regionally important resource. However, they reported last year that the zoo is beyond its expected life cycle and will, in the foreseeable future, be inadequate to meet animal care needs. So far this year, 49 volunteers have donated over 1,435 hours of free labor to the county by helping with animal care, habitat maintenance, and exhibit interpretation because they love the zoo and the privilege of working with the animals. All of this demonstrates the public enthusiasm and support for Bear Hollow. Please help this old but treasured facility last for decades to come in order to educate our citizens, our visitors, and especially our children about Georgia native wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sheldon.
Mayor Gertz, Commissioners, my name is Chris Sparnicht. I live at 354 Glenwood Drive. Also on behalf of the Friends of Bear Hollow, I urge you to fund Project 60, a complete rebuild of Bear Hollow Wildlife Trail. Athens-Clarke County is growing. With more people and all of the positive publicity, Bear Hollow is seeing more traffic. While adding new features and amenities to our community is important, what may be even more telling is how we manage our existing cherished assets. I would like to add that Joan, her husband, Wade, and her son Wade spent almost a decade, about 3 hours every weekend, managing the care of the animals in the reptile house. Friends of Bear Hollow board member Maureen Carter got certified on her own as an animal trainer and spends many hours every week herself at the zoo training with the animals. Every Saturday for about 3.5 years, I was a docent in the reptile house. Several celebrated seasonal events have become reasons for traditional family visits to the zoo. Caterpillar relocated in this area in part because our zoo was an amenity that they felt was an appropriate draw for future employees. I hope you will seriously consider what the future of Bear Hollow Zoo will look like. Also, I'd like to thank the commissioners who came to our tour last night. Thank you very much. Other commissioners, if you're interested, we would like to give you the opportunity to visit the zoo as well, because we feel it's really important. You can contact us at friendsofbearhollow@gmail.com, or you can contact Joan or myself at some point today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smarnick. Other citizen input on SPLOST 2020.
Somebody left their phone here.
Good evening. My name is Michael Smith, 147 Bryan Street. I love a lot of the SPLOST projects. I think the environmental and sustainable projects and the waste projects are very important as well. Hope we don't forget about those. I think that I really don't want the Classic Center on the list. I think there's going to be a time that the Classic Center expands, but I don't think it's right now. I think that I was reading a report the other day that Athens-Clarke County is the #2 county in the whole country as far as growth in luxury housing, percentage growth. What's happening is that the luxury development and the luxury economy in downtown Athens is causing lots of pressure for regular everyday folk to invest in downtown, start small businesses, and spend money in downtown. The head of the Classic Center said the River District will develop if we build the Classic Center expansion. However, in just 3 properties in the Pottery Street neighborhood behind Weaver D's, Landmark Properties has spent $1.1 million for them. They were appraised an average of $150,000 per property. So we don't have any community agreements with any existing elite developers. And so what's going to happen is the Classic Center is going to expand, and then we're going to have 4- and 5-star hotels behind Weaver D's instead of a plan that will help the community. And I'm also, in closing, I'm not really for sure if all the commissioners are even aware that the Classic Center still wants money from the SPLOST. So I was wondering if any of the commissioners could clarify that, because if it is true, then people like Bear Hollow and 100% Energy need to know it so they can start protecting and advocating for their projects when the money is cut from other projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Chris Dowd again. I also really don't want to see the Classic Center on the list. I hope that's not being considered. I think what makes a lot more sense is to fund the renewable energy project to the full amount, because I think that's a win for taxpayers because it'll lower operating costs, and also it's a win for the environment. Right? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dowd. Other input on SPLOST 2020?
Hi, my name is Nikki Luke. I live at 197B Oglethorpe Avenue, 30606. And I want to thank the Mayor and Commission and the SPLOST Citizens Committee for putting together these proposals and the finalist list, and speak in support of Measure 51, 52, and 84, the renewable energy projects. And thank you to the Mayor and Commission for supporting the resolution that was just adopted. And I just want to second a couple of the things that have been said already this evening. I've been in Athens for about 3 years, and I came here for graduate school, but before coming here, I was working at the University of California, Berkeley Labor Center on issues of energy equity. And energy equity is a really complicated issue that concerns not only who gets jobs in the clean energy economy, how much people pay for clean energy and the cost of taking dirty energy offline, and who has access to clean energy amenities. And I support and commend Commissioner Denson and Commissioner Parker for the statements that they have said already about prioritizing low-income, brown, black, and senior communities. And I think that Athens has a real opportunity to provide leadership in this front through the SPLOST initiatives. Last week, Mr. Saunders spoke at the Georgia Public Service Commission, and as a sustainability manager was incredibly influential in noting the work that Athens is doing to date, and is leading in so many fronts and pushing other communities in Georgia to do the same. Tomorrow I'll be speaking at the shareholders meeting of the Southern Company, and also noting the work that Athens has already done in advancing this resolution and the work that we continue to do in noting that energy is an intersectional issue that must take seriously issues of racial justice, economic justice, and environmental justice. And the step to improve energy efficiency, to implement renewable energy, to implement an electrical vehicle fleet, and to continue to take these steps at the city level and the county level is a really important way in which we can show leadership and continue to model these actions that promote equity, especially in the issue of energy for Athens-Clarke County. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Luke. It's been suggested that Athens is Berkeley on the Oconee, and now we know it's fact. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to know where the black, brown, yellow, green, purple communities are. In my neighborhood, we're black, white, brown. I'm half Cherokee. What neighborhoods are you speaking of that's impoverished that needs help, because we all do? It's not certain neighborhoods in Clarke County. It's everybody in Clarke County. Yes, there might be some fortunate ones out there, but the ones of us who are not, and are not of any color that people don't think of, are hurting just as much as everybody else. We're in Bogart. We get absolutely nothing from Clarke County. We're on well water. We have our own septic tank. We have to pay for trash pickup. We have to cut our own lawns. We get nothing from Clarke County. Keep going up on us. And then the SPLOST keeps going up. All this stuff is great, but we're paying for it. University's not paying for it. We're paying for it. I can't afford to do it. Maybe your old father can't afford to do it. You need to find some way to pay for this without it hurting every community and every person, black, white, yellow, green, purple, blue, in Clarke County. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Ms. McLahan. Other public input on SPLOST 2020?
Good evening. My name is Tommy Valentine, 395 Cleveland Avenue. Those of you that know me know that I usually like reading or going unscripted, but tonight's pretty important, so I'm going to cheat and go off notes for once. I would like to take this occasion as the Executive Director of Athens-Clarke Heritage Foundation to start by saying some thanks. We really want to thank all the members of the Citizens Advisory Committee. They worked tirelessly to make this project better. The end result was a cheaper, more efficient, improved version of this project with a clearer vision of how it could serve a wider variety of people. I also want to thank the ACC staff that helped us generate the initial proposal. There's been questions about the expenses, and the fact is that when you open a new park, there are certain infrastructure that you're required to have. Sorry, this is Beach Haven Park. Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. So there's certain criteria that you're required to have to open this park to the public. We're proud and we feel confident that thanks to ACC staff, we were able to develop the right number and the right project. We also want to thank our community partners and the members of this community that gave out of their own pockets to help raise $70,000 to stabilize the roof of the house. This community is given generously, including the Rowland family that originally owned the property, but it's now in your hands. There's been talk about us seeking additional grants, but we are no longer able to do that because ownership has been transferred to Athens-Clarke County. We've now entered a phase where you, as Athens-Clarke County, can act as stewards of this deteriorating historical site. This is not a forest preserve. There is priceless architecture that many have written on could be a tourist destination. And when you open the gates to this park, you'll also be opening the minds of people in this community that don't understand historical context, don't understand how important African-American craftsmen have been to the building of this community. And also, there's been a lot said tonight about how the SPLOST expense goes everywhere. Everyone pays for it. So consider this. This project would not have made the list if you as a commission had not made equity a requirement. Thank you for that. This park represents geographic equity. It represents a location where there's 400 to 500 families that will now be within walking distance of a park. Most of those families are low to moderate income. Some have transportation challenges that prevent them from visiting some of the incredible parks around our community. I've heard the idea of taking care of what we have, and I agree, and you have this. I do want to also just say that SPLOST needs to pass. And we are excited as Athens-Clarke Heritage Foundation of partnering with you to promote that through our network. But I want you to consider whether the West Side is going to continue supporting SPLOST, if not given a signature project to rally behind and support. I understand that this is a commission that has geographic pressures. Each of you have constituents who have advocated for projects. Thank you for considering ours among them.
Thank you, Mr. Valentine. Other citizen input on SPLOST 2020.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commission. My name is Nene Onyaha Clayton of 145 Three Oaks Drive, 30606. On behalf of 100% Athens, I would like to say thank you very much for passing the 100% clean and renewable energy resolution, and in doing so, establishing a legacy of hope. We are looking forward to working with all members of the community within the government, outside the government, to implement this optimally, bearing in mind our goals. We will not take our eyes off that goal. And so we look forward to the long road ahead of collaboration and community. Thank you.
Thank you much. Other citizen input on SPLOST 2020. If you leave those with the county attorney, he'll distribute those. There's no other citizen input on SPLOST 2020. This is here as an opportunity for public hearing. The Citizen Advisory Group has recommended a package. Over the next 2 months, the Mayor and Commission will consider and prospectively can make any required or desired modifications to this package. It will be finalized in July and then go before the voters in November of 2019. Any Commission input at this point on SPLOST 2020? Commissioner
Yes,
D.
sir,
Smith.
thank you. I want to address the Tallahassee Forest. I too have an issue with, unless it's corrected, about how the public has not been involved. The last public presentation about plans for Tallahassee Forest were, I believe, in 2012, after I was first elected. There's been a lot of work, a lot of planning done since then, but the public, to my knowledge, and it is my district, has not been involved. It has not been invited to a hearing. And, you know, I'm almost reluctant to support this project unless there is a commitment to involve the public and to listen to the public on this project. I believe the project can be done in a way that minimizes the impact on the neighborhoods, minimizes the impact on this beautiful 300 acres of pristine property, but also allows the use of it in the way it should be, which is educational for our children, for our university, and just for people who want to take a long hike. So I want to say that word of caution. Someone's going to have to explain to me how we're going to involve the public because I haven't heard a plan. And I know the SPLOST is handled a little differently than if we had a leisure services project and it took the step by step and step. So I suppose we've identified the money, and now we'll begin the step by step implementation of a plan, which includes public input. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The other thing, while I've got you here, is try to explain the debt service, the $21 million of debt service. That simply allows us, instead of waiting for tax collections before we begin a project, it allows us to float bonds so that we can begin a project immediately. So we borrow money and not have to wait for tax collections, but we have to pay that money back. And of course, there's interest on that money. The advantages to that are that we can begin a project sooner. We can avoid the inevitable construction inflation costs of waiting, especially for major projects. The inflation is going to make the project much more expensive than what we had planned. We did this for the jail, we did it for the Classic Center, and we've done it for other projects in the past. It lets us get those projects done early by floating a bond and then paying off that debt by the end of the SPLOST period.
Any other commission input this evening? Commissioner Link?
Yeah, first of all, I want to commend the Citizen Committee for their monumental task of winnowing these projects down. I know it was extremely difficult, and I know they had heated conversations, and I feel like they've come up with a really good list. I feel like it's a really fair list, and it addresses the charge that we gave them. And I do feel that there is a good equity component, and they are addressing the needs of particularly low-income communities and communities that have been left out in past capital projects and past SPLOST. I'm happy to see the Vincent Drive sidewalk on there, and I'm happy to see Holland Youth Sports Park improvements. Those that's an area on the edge of the county that has a very large working class population, and it doesn't have that kind of infrastructure, and there's definitely a need for more facilities for the youth who actually live there. So Holland Park getting improvements will greatly benefit from that. And I want to remind folks that SPLOST projects, it's a state legislation-enabled program, and it only allows us to use these funds for capital improvement actual construction projects. You know, we have lots and lots of needs in this community when it comes to our low-income community and our poverty issues, and those are issues that primarily need to be addressed with programming. So I'm hoping, I know that with our prosperity package, we're going to start addressing that programming, but SPLOST itself, by law, by state law, can only address facilities. And I do see that there are facilities on this list that will, you know, be open to some of those programming dollars and directly impact that low-income community, the Gaines School Center, and certainly a lot of these parks that are going to reach communities like Beach Haven, that are going to reach communities that don't have access to those facilities at this time. So this is a way to open up the door to that programming. I also want to point out that, yes, everybody pays that penny. Our low-income community pays that penny when they do make purchases, but also everybody who comes into town for a football game pays that penny. And I also want to remind folks that people pay that penny regardless of whether or not they're a citizen of the United States or not. And so everybody is able to use these public facilities. Everybody pays that penny. And I feel like, you know, the committee has done a pretty good job of addressing those equity concerns.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Since this public hearing snuck up on me and my calendar and my ability to share with those who wanted to come and express their ideas, and I'm glad we had the comments that came forward today. Can you summarize for me our dates while we're on camera so that other people will know when our next, when we get to talk about what our ideals are, asking staff, like we do in budget? what would this look like if it was changed or something like that?
So, management team, do you have the coming SPLOST conversation dates? I don't have those in front of me, Commissioner
Okay.
Wright.
Well, so maybe, we can get those up on the website when we get that outline of when that is? If it's not readily available right now?
If that's not already on splost.com, then we'll make sure that is.
Okay, and maybe I just need to get dialed into the splost.com myself for it.
Early
but-
on in the World Wide Web,
Yeah,
we claimed splost.com, nobody else can have it.
There you go. And so, knowing that right now, when we have 27 agenda items next to talk about tonight, this is not exactly the time for us to be our brainstorming and idea sharing. So I just wanted, the public to know that we have a big night ahead of us as well. And then I also, some of the questions that I'll be asking about are learning what are those critical needs that Mr. Valentine was talking about when you open a new park, because I'm concerned about what we currently have, especially for the Sandy Creek Nature Center at Bear Hollow, where we have residents that people go visit, the animals and stuff. So I think there's some critical needs that we need to look at and make sure are being maintained at the highest standard, especially for our zoo and where we have visitors visiting captive animals. I think it's another area that we need to make sure we're doing it at the highest level of respect for the animals as well, and just different things like that, so we can learn what that is dollar-wise as well as facility-wise to make sure that all of our existing ones would be aren't being slighted for the new areas. But that's the kind of stuff I think we can talk about at a work session, and I look forward to that.
Commissioner Parker?
I'm sensing that everyone's ready to keep it rolling, but really briefly, I wanted to thank the CAC again. I know they've worked so hard putting this list together, and so to me, especially with us having taken up so much of the money with our own designated projects, I really want to honor their hard work by honoring the list that they have brought to us. So as we are discussing any possible switch-ups or anything like that, let's take into account that, like, we appointed these folks to get this job done for us. They've done an excellent job. They've presented us with a really fabulous list. And I think that this list does, as Commissioner Link said, address a lot of equity concerns, both geographically and in terms of the other project goals and criteria we set out at the beginning of this process. So thank you all for your hard work, and I hope that we as a body will consider honoring that by moving this list forward to the final vote.
Thanks, Commissioner Parker. Commissioner Denson?
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to also, thank Commissioner Wright here for bringing up the need for the public input and how we need to have that happening. And I agree with Commissioner Neesmith that we need to make sure that residents who are near these areas are aware of what's going on. Definitely want to, again, this plug, go to splost.com. You can check out these projects. And on the Tallahassee Forest, there is a Tallahassee Forest master plan that was rolled out last year, which is basically what they'll be implementing for this project. That one's one I'm very excited about. It's, again, we talk about that geographic equity. It's out there. Me and Commissioner Neesmith get to share that one. It's exciting. But there definitely was public input for that master plan, so I encourage people who weren't able to be a part of that process. Hopefully, we do have more public input happening. I remember attending a input session at the Dowry Street building where they actually showed all the different species of butterflies and insects and trees that are just only in that area, which it's very rare, so another reason it needs to be protected. But if you go to acc.gov/Tallahassee Forest Park, you can see the master plan and actually sign up for notifications about things happening with the Tallahassee Forest Park, too.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other input? I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the special called session.
I'll move.
Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Link, second from Commissioner Parker to adjourn the special called session. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? All right, we will now move forward to our regularly scheduled standard third Tuesday of the month agenda setting session. Give everybody a moment to kind of move if you're leaving the chamber after the special called session.
Oh, yeah, this actually.
Got it now. I got it now. But, We're just now getting dialed in.
Yeah, we haven't even started our regular agenda yet.
Stay in your seats. Giving everybody who was here for SPLOST a moment to move out. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and continue with our agenda setting session. So if you were just here for SPLOST, we appreciate you joining us.
So I'm going to email you every week. I mean, from that on.
I agree.
I would want to I was talking to I was like the Rolling Stones song.
All right, everybody, we're continuing with our agenda setting session, and tonight there are going to be 3 distinct opportunities for public input on our agenda setting session. We've got the consent agenda, which are items 1 through 16. We have new business, items 17 through 25, and then we have planning and zoning reports, of which there are 2, and there will be a separate opportunity for public input on each of those planning and zoning items. So again, first, any member of the audience who would like to speak to our consent agenda, again, those are items number 1 through 16. Please come to the podium, and you have 3 minutes. Again, just state your name and address. And as always, when the light turns yellow, you will have 30 seconds remaining, and when it turns red, the time is up.
All right. Tyler Dewey, 1075 West Broad Street. I'm not going to take my full 3 minutes. I'm just really, for the record, talking about item number 2, particularly the Athens in Motion Commission, just to give full-hearted support for that. It's exciting to see the continuing implementation of Athens in Motion move forward. I know this was one of the things that in the non-infrastructural pieces that the plan recommended was the creation of just this type of commission. I think, given the way it's structured, to have a representative from the Greenway Commission allows, hopefully, for the breaking down of those silos. So I think we can all get on this, all be on the same page and pulling in the same direction. So it's really exciting to see. So just speaking in support of that.
Thank you, Mr. Dewey. Other input on items number 1 through 16?
I'm putting on my bike hat, Carol Myers, 260 Spalding Circle. And this is the last time I'm talking tonight, short. I'm speaking now as a board member of Bike Athens and a member of the citizen committee that worked to create Athens in Motion, our community's bike and pedestrian master plan. I'm in total support of the creation of Athens in Motion Citizen Commission to support the implementation of the bike pedestrian plan. This plan, and I brought it with me, over 200 pages long, is a complex plan. It provides 3 prioritized tiers of bike and sidewalk projects. That's over 210 projects, 95 for bikes and 115 for sidewalks. It includes rationale for the prioritization and what it outlines industry design guidelines for sidewalks and bike infrastructure. It lays out goals and objectives for what we're doing in terms of our bike and pedestrian infrastructure as well. Having a commission solely dedicated to this plan and its revision is essential. They'll be able to help you, commissioners, make the best decisions you can. Our streets are our community's common space. This Athens in Motion plan and a newly created commission, along with the wonderful new bike pedestrian safety coordinator, will help make sure that our streets are safe and welcoming to all, no matter the mode of transportation, no matter what part of town they are in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Other citizen input on items number 1 through 16, our consent agenda.
Good evening, Mayor, Dr. Diane Dunstan. Again, glad to be here and happy to see that this commission is going to approve the lease agreement at the Miriam Community Service Center with the agencies that are listed. We have a long relationship with this government. When the citizens of East Athens fought to revitalize the community, we were met with great resistance, but we wouldn't give up. And the Miriam Community Service Center came into existence, and then we were taxed greatly from the very beginning. I believe $1,300 a month at the Neighborhood Health Center and $990 or something at East Athens Development Corporation, the Athens Tutorial Center. For 20-plus years, I did whatever I could to make sure that we did proper services out of those facilities, and that I paid the government so that I wouldn't be put out and couldn't do the services. Always felt like it was just a poll tax, anything to keep us from doing what is right in the community. And I just ask, as you relook at the whole county and what you are doing in the name of equity, that we, the people, are all treated fairly. I can't say it enough. There's a serious problem in this country. We're no different. And I believe that if I were probably a different color, a different sex, I wouldn't be as tired as I am now, coming again to just have to beg and say, give us relief, treat us fairly, and let us continue to do what we need to do for all of the citizens. And, you know, we do it in hope, because we know that just like I made it when they said I couldn't because I was poor and Black and female, there are a whole lot of others out there, and that's why I come and speak and fight and clean the floors, because I can't pay someone to clean them for me, because I got to make sure that $990 gets to this government every month, or I said that I'm no good, but I don't believe that.
Thank you, Dr. Dunstan. Other input on consent agenda items 1 through 16?
This is the first time I've been here. My name's Diane Allen Jordan, and been here to speak. My mother's was Evelyn C. Neely, and she was a regular person here to speak on things. We miss her very much. And I feel like it's my duty and a responsibility that I speak to you now about East Athens. I gave several years of volunteer services prior to the Moore Chastain Commission. We did a study. We basically started with a group of citizens and grew on that idea of putting things together, because we were so tired of what was happening in East Athens. And as a result of that, we had commanded a lot of funds were brought here. I know that you're aware of the fact of how many people are impoverished in East Athens. And this was, 20-something years ago that this happened. Nothing has happened. And in fact, we have suffered. We suffered when we brought attention to ourselves and thought we were helping ourselves. But I stayed with the corporation. I chaired the board of directors for 5 years. And at the time that I left Athens, basically, I was, of course, born and raised here, but left here because I could not get funding for my business as an entrepreneur. And when I came back, I found I was very dismayed, because I thought that things were in a better position than they were, and finding that the corporation had to basically fight to get every penny that was already supposed to be there for them. And was told basically that the corporation couldn't do anything but the project on the, the business district that the community chose to, have funds placed in. And in doing that, it has caused a lot of problems. And one of them, is there was no human services. So I've been doing research about, what happened. And I found out that when the city pulled funds, from the community, and they were trying to go back because of the fact that part of the mandate, as I understand, from the unification was that we did certain things for communities, and we did not do that. So a lot of people have enjoyed the fact that census tract at that time, 1 and 3, were the designated areas. I think it's 301 and 302. Does that mean that I'm almost out of time? Well, I'm going to take a little liberty here because I've never been here, and this is very, very, very important. We all know why Athens is in the situation it is because of the number of people who are struggling. We have done nothing for East Athens and the citizens there, nothing. And when I left and when we came up with the idea of the Miriam Moore Complex, there was a technology part. Excuse me, it was supposed to be like technology part. One part of it should have been for incubators, for small businesses, and East Athens Development Corporation was actually was going to be like a leaseholder, and people would be paying rent to them. Never that they would have to pay for a place to be. And now, after years and years and years of no funding, you can't exist. And one of the major problems with East Athens is there's no organization, and we don't have the luxury of having neighborhood organizations and those things. And it makes it very, very difficult to do anything. I've been talking to Mariah and trying to, figure out how we can make things better.
Ms. Jordan, we appreciate you coming down tonight, and thank you for speaking with us.
Yes, but one of the things I was going to do was to recommend that we do something for the citizens of East Athens that you actually owe something to that we have not done. So, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Other input on 1 through 16 this evening?
My name is Shirley Taylor. I live at 448 Little Oak Street. I'm a resident of East Athens. I was very shocked to even think that the $1,600 the neighborhood health center would have to pay. I've been using the neighborhood health center ever since it's been there. And it's very important to us. I'm just a little plain, no ties to nothing. But when I go into neighborhood health center, I have pride, and I'm glad it's there. But for to say $1,600, and as if they had a budget, a great budget, and they can just put it out there. So I wish you would consider changing that price. That's just too much for us. We love the Neighborhood Health Center and both of the programs, but the Neighborhood Health Center has been a very, 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 very important part to us. Sometimes people can look at you and think that you don't need it, but we need the Neighborhood Health Center, and God knows that price of $1,600 a month could go down. Thank you.
Thank you much, Ms. Taylor. Other input on consent agenda items 1 through 16 tonight?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. I want to come to and say that we need your help. I had the fortunate situation that I retired from state government, and but I came out of retirement to volunteer as Dr. Dunston is volunteering over at the East Athens Community Center. Excuse me. Because just like Dr. Dunston said, I came from a neighborhood just like that as well. And so I know the potential that we're losing over there. So we just need your help. We need your help in many ways, and we appreciate the help that we're getting from Ms. London and others, but we need your continuous help so that we can do more for the citizens and the youth of East Athens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Other input on items 1 through 16 this evening? All right, our next order of business, hearing no more input on the consent agenda, is to come behind the rail for movement of any of the consent agenda items to discussion. So Commissioner Harrod first.
I'd like to remove 1, 2, and 7 for some discussion, please.
1, 2, and 7 from Commissioner Harrod. Commissioner Thornton?
I would, since the 10 through 13 are lease agreements, I would like to move that until our voting session. I think we could come up with a way to take care of this debt. I have questions. I would like to move this from the agenda.
All right, so we're going to move 10 through 13 to discussion.
For discussion.
All right, other items? Commissioner Link?
Oh, wait. Commissioner Harrod said he took 2, right?
1, 2, and 7.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
It's like bingo.
All right. We will go ahead and now have public input on new business and then commission discussion on new business. So items 17 through 25. Any public input on items 17 through 25? All right, seeing none.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Seeing none, we will move to discussion of those items that commissioners removed, which were 1, 3, 7, and 10 through 13, and then our aforementioned new business.
1, 2, and 7.
1, 2, 7, thank you. 1, 2, 7, 10 through 13, and then new business. So Commissioner Harrod, you asked that number 1 be removed.
I did. I just had a simple question. I've read this about 4 different times, and I still couldn't figure out, is this going to change the amount of revenue that we are generating, or is this simply going to change the language that regulates, or not regulates, but relates to the insurance companies?
This is really just a semantic dispute that we've had with the Department of Revenue. The tax.
For it to go back on.
All right, everybody else happy for 1 to go back on consent? All right, make a note of that. Commissioner Harrod, you also asked for number 2, the Athens in Motion Commission.
I did, and I support the creation of the commission. I think it's a good idea, but I did have some suggestions, mostly relating, well, several are relating to language and procedure, and then some are related to some more substantive things. So throughout the document, it does talk about the names of the various committees, talking about chairman and vice chairman. I think those should just be chair and vice chair, so they're not quite so gendered in their language. It talked about the initial appointment of the 5 members and how they would be assigned to their staggered terms in our community. And one of the things that boards tend to do is they tend to select people that kind of look like them when they're looking for replacements. And so I think that rather than having the boards kind of pick their future replacements and have those approved by the mayor and commission, I would like to see members of this commission apply like we do with the other boards, authorities, and commissions and be selected by the mayor and commission rather than be self-selecting and simply rubber stamped by us. I think also that it talks about how commission members on the board can be removed by a vote of the other commission members. I think that the mayor and commission needs to have authority to remove members. It talks about copies of minutes. I think that the copy of the minutes needs to also be lodged with the clerk of commission. I think obviously if we approve this, which I hope we do, that it will need to be included in our new boards, authorities, and commission handbook. And finally, I think that it says in here about the commission, whatever the acronym is, AIMC, can change its own bylaws. But given that we're going to be talking about an awful lot of money here, I think that those bylaw changes need to be also signed off on by the mayor and commission. So I'm completely supportive of having this commission. I just think that it needs to be done in a slightly different way.
Taking notes on these items, thanks. Other input? Commissioner Link?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank staff and the mayor for taking the initiative to form this committee, this commission. This is something that I've been advocating for pretty much since I got on the commission over 4 years ago. And I'm really excited to see a group like this being created. We spend a lot of time behind the rail going back and forth about these transportation issues, and I think it's really going to spare us some grief knowing that there's a engaged citizen committee out there doing some of the front-end work on some of these projects. I agree with Commissioner Harrod's comment about the self-selecting board. I think it is important that we see those board members select, an open call for board members that are vetted by the commission like we do with so many other boards, so we can ensure that there's a really diverse board that truly represents the whole community. And I also, one thing I see lacking in the charge is any reference whatsoever to transit. I'd like to see some reference to this committee keeping in mind that the connectivity to transit. As someone who does take the bus, I walk a half mile to the bus stop. I feel like that there should always be a consideration of access to those bus stops, and our buses have bike racks. So I feel that should be folded into the charge of this committee in some way, and I'd be happy to come up with a CDO that injects that language in there in some way or another. But otherwise, I'm really, really excited to see this moving forward and look forward to seeing the work of this committee.
I'll note there was some kind of just earlier spitballing, for lack of a better term, conversation about transit, and in conversation very early in this calendar year with staff, that was seen as sort of a significant enough mission space to not want to conjoin it too fully with the bike and ped work, although recognizing, of course, the Athens in Motion plan does recognize transit connectivity as one of those ideal elements of a bike ped planning program.
Yeah, I'd like to just see that, even a clause injected in there that references transit and the importance of bike ped connectivity to those routes.
Commissioner Wright, you indicated an interest.
I really appreciate Professor Harrod. He obviously is out of class right now and has a little extra spare time to review in the same pen manner I'm sure that he grades and reads his students' work. But I do appreciate all that detail. Will that come forward in a commission-defined option? How are we going to process that?
That'd be the ideal way if Professor Harrod would.
If people are okay with it, I would suggest that we just direct the mayor and the manager to include that language and to jiggle with it a little bit.
And I've got notes on all those bullet points. I'd be happy
I
to prepare
can put
that.
a CDO together if you prefer. But
I just wanted, procedurally wise, I was curious if we're all just nodding our head or which way, how it goes. But if it can go in as scribblers? Or
Scriveners.
Scriveners, if it can go in as that at this point.
And these are substantive enough that I think we'd want a new text that contains those, and we could present that at the voting meeting.
Okay.
And certainly I could make sure that probably in the next week that everybody's got a copy of that.
Okay, so it's in a timely manner. So that was really just my question. I wanted to make sure that those details came on forward.
Other input on Athens in Motion, item number 2? Commissioner Neesmith.
Yeah, I just want to say I also appreciate Andy's thoroughness, and I support Commissioner Link's idea about explicitly mentioning transit as part of their task. I think that's very important, and we're liable to forget about it when we're talking about bike trails and sidewalks, whereas I know there are lots of bus stops that have no way to get to, lots of them, and we need to fix that.
Commissioner Hamby.
Yeah, just real quick. So it's my understanding this is different from what you're planning on doing in July or something like that with the transportation sort of committee as well. Is that
this is the bike ped committee,
right? So this is separate from what you're also thinking of doing, putting together a trends like Commissioner Link's been talking about for a number of years.
There's been some conversation about kind of a transit advisory group.
Right.
But this is not that.
Okay, so that is still forthcoming.
Yes, and it has not been drafted yet.
Okay.
So there's no date kind of attached to that, just so you know.
And just to be clear, because the commission defined options coming forward on number 2, it will no longer be on consent.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Any other input on number 2 before we move on to 7? All right, we're moving on to the Gaines School Road at Hillman Middle School traffic relocation that Commissioner Harrod referenced earlier.
Thank you. This is really more of a technical question. So I think in the grand scheme of things, it makes sense to move the traffic light. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to my map here. The question I had really was for staff, and it talks in here about putting in some turn lanes. So does that mean that that part of Gaines is going to be widened to accommodate that, or are you planning on doing that within the current width of the road?
From what it appears, it would be the current width of the road.
Okay. So what will that mean for the width?
I'm sorry. It'll be widened towards the school. My apologies.
Okay, so if it's wide, will it be widened on both sides or just on the school side? And if it's just on the school side, what will that mean for the flow, the linearity of the flow of the lanes?
It'll be just on the school side.
Okay, so does that mean as you're driving down Gaines School Road and you get to the new intersection, there'll be kind of a kink in it?
Oh, that's a good question. We'll certainly do a little bit more research and provide some of those details.
I mean, as I said, I think it makes sense to move the location of the traffic light, but I just want to be clear what that will mean for how things will move along that corridor.
Mr. Mayor?
Commissioner Wright?
I have some feedback from the Citizens Oversight for SPLOST, which has been working with the county on this, that I think there's some trees are coming out. We're trying to minimize those trees. I think that they are turning in, making it they're redoing that and might be adding a turning lane because of them getting to this one intersection. And so where they've got the silt
Fences.
yeah, and some trees are coming down, but we're trying to still keep the barrier, I think, between the street with some of the trees. And so maybe some of that detail can come from the school district to clarify that.
Well, just to follow up, I'm looking at the diagram. It looks like there's going to be a turn lane. So if you're coming from basically Barnett Shoals Road, there'll be a turn lane to turn left into the school. But if you're coming from Lexington Road, there's also going to be a turn lane to turn left into Barrington Drive. And so I guess my question is, if all of the widening of the road is going to be on the Gaines school side, what will that mean for, if you're coming from Lexington to Barnett Shoals, will all of the traffic have to move over to pass through that intersection, or what's it going to look like?
Okay. We can find that.
Leave that one off consent. Okay. Any other input on the intersection question, item 7? All right, so we're going to move on to the set of lease agreement questions. And just as we approach conversation on items 10 through 13, I'll note, kind of as represented in the text of the agenda item, historically what has happened is a new lease agreement every 5 years. And so what's suggested here is a 1-year lease agreement, and I've had conversations with staff about having a comprehensive review of the way that we run leases with independent agencies generally. So there are norms about how those leases are written rather than being what I describe as ad hoc and not seeming to have any relationship between the nature of the organization and what it does in the community and its lease. And so what I've provided for everybody on the commission is a sheet that you can see is a representation of all the Athens-Clarke County government-owned facilities leased by independent agencies. And as you can see on that sheet, you've got a variety of situations and a variety of organizations. I'll say that management has indicated that before the end of the year, it would be easy for them to produce a rational policy that would drive future lease arrangements for all organizations so that we would have something consistent to work from. So again, we've kind of moved from a 5-year time frame into what's represented here as a 1-year time frame. Certainly, the commission has the authority and the autonomy to move to an even tighter time frame and determine what would be done kind of within that time of completion of a comprehensive policy. So I just want you to keep that in mind just as we begin discussion. And so, Commissioner Thornton, I'm going to begin with you since you pulled this from the agenda.
I'm glad that, to hear, Mayor, that you have directed staff to come up with a equitable process and policy for lease agreements. I would like, though, for 10 and 13 to come off, and I know that Commissioner Parker is looking at doing a CDO, which I could work with her on that. I think there's some other options that we can look at for funding having these rents paid and not take a dip, but I would like to have the time to work on a CDO, look at some other options, and remove it move the 4 off the consent agenda.
Okay. Just note that the current leases expire at the end of June of calendar year 2019, so we're going to have to come up for a vote on this in June. And I think it's probably very viable to put together a plan that will carry out the rest of this calendar year. But just want to let you know that
we'll work on this immediately. I think for the direction that we're trying to go, whatever we need to do, whether it's June or, we'll shoot for that deadline. But after seeing this list that you gave us, it is really imperative that we deal with this as far as equity is concerned. So we'll be ready in June. Mariah? Everybody, anybody? And Allison said that she'll help. So we'll be ready in June.
Commissioner Parker?
Thank you. Commissioner Lake was first, but if you wouldn't mind backing off of her comments really quick. Regardless of the institutional logic behind this list, when you hold it up in front of your eyes and hold it up and look at it, to me this is what racism looks like. To see that these organizations that are serving our most impoverished and most challenged communities in Athens are being made to pay such exorbitant rates for annual maintenance assessment. At the end of the day, no matter how you want to spin it, it doesn't look too good. And so I'm really looking forward to working with Commissioner Thornton and hopefully Commissioner Wright to see that as a matter of equity, these fees are totally relieved for the remainder of for this lease period until we come up with a comprehensive strategy for fairly charging these organizations for leasing these spaces from us. Because in the meantime, to maintain this level of robbery, I personally couldn't stand for. So I'm glad that we're all kind of on board about reassessing the way this is working. It has been working for a really long time, though. 1999 is a really long time to go without reassessing these fees. So as a matter of equity, I think it's fair that we offer these organizations some relief in the meantime.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, every time these leases have come up, I've always questioned them. And now that I see this list with everything all together, I question them even more. I would like to see some kind of line item review of these maintenance fees. Like, they do seem exorbitant. And what exactly it takes to maintain these buildings. I mean, these are some fairly small spaces that are being rented. And we have all these other nonprofit entities who are only paying $1 a month for their rent, and presumably maintaining their spaces on their own. And I can't imagine that they pay this much to keep up their spaces. So I wonder, do they report those costs? I'm curious to know if these other organizations are required to report those costs so we can assess if these maintenance fees are even fair. Yeah, I'd just really like to see some line item figures, and if we're going to come up with a fair means of determining the appropriate costs for leasing our space, I'd like to see those figures.
Commissioner Wright.
Thank you. I'm really glad we have some momentum going on this, because when I was reading it, it stood out to me, and I can tell you that my eyes weren't looking in this way like they should have before. So when I read it today, I did some outreach to make sure I was, I did the math. And so the reassessment regarding the lease agreement for the office space starts with a letter, starts with the conversation, but it doesn't just need to include these four. It's all of them. So seeing the different math and the different scenarios in the new building and the different things. I understand that likely at the Mariah Moore Community Service Center, when that came online, there was, I see and read the logic for how that is, but it's in the different categories, but it's still, you can't explain it. You just can't explain it. And so if I did the math right, they add up to be $49,000. I would hope that the commission defined option is in the line of making sure the details of the lease agreements that are covering the details that the attorney likes covered and everything, but that the amount just turns into $1 for next year. So we have plenty of time to have work sessions and committee assignment. It's policy. This is all about policy, so it seems like it should be going to a policy committee. I would be happy for LRC to pick up the speed on what's in our committee so that we can receive this sooner rather than later to address all of it. And I think we should also include a little learning session on what rent the government pays for our departments to pay lease or rent somewhere else, so that we can realize that we ought not be doing that either with the number of facilities. If somebody's renting something for $1 and we're paying the chamber for rental space, so it's a big thing, and it's a reassessment that I think we're all ready for, and I look forward to the work for it. So if this goes off consent and then gets worked with this commission defined option, I'd like to join you ladies in putting that together.
Commissioner Hamby.
Thank you, Mayor. And it sounds like within the commission defined option, it's also going to trail into the budget discussion. So there's certainly some opportunities there within the contingency of this year to look at the $40-something thousand to do that. Because I do agree that if we're going to assess this during the year, then everybody needs to be treated the same. I note in here that it's noted that the EADC rents the community room to events for a fee. I also know that the Junior League rents the Taylor Grady House for a fee.
Big fee.
I'm not sure what the Heritage Foundation does, and I know we rent the, you have to pay a fee to rent the fire hall there, and Five Points and others as well. So at any rate, I mean, the point about make sure everybody's treated the same resonates, and we should look at that not only in the policy, but within this year's budget as well.
Commissioner Thornton and then Commissioner Neesmith.
And I want to reiterate directing this to the LSC committee because Commissioner Hamby kind of touched on it. We have groups that are actually paying $1 and making big money on events and programs, and we don't get a dime of that back. We have people that are living in property, so we've become a housing person group. So if it goes back to LLC, we can work through those issues because there is definitely some inequity that we need to address. And I don't think, nobody wants to just work on that, but LLC would be the place I would want to land on.
Commissioner Neesmith.
Well, I want to start by apologizing to Avita because she pointed this inequity out early on, very early on in her term here, and I didn't understand it, and now I do. And yeah, you're right, Mariah. The other thing is I want to be sure that these organizations, if we charge them a small rent, that their goals match up with ours, and that they are achieving those goals, And then the question becomes, what else are they permitted to do? You know, if they're making profit for themselves, we need to understand exactly what that profit is being used for, that it's being used for their mission and no other purpose. So we need to work from this from both angles. We need to be sure, we need to be generous and facilitate these organizations, and they need to be sticking to their mission, period.
It's fair to say these 4 items will stay off consent. All right, and can we take that discussion as having encompassed 10 through 13? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
All right. Conversation will absolutely continue. Thank you all for your input. I appreciate it. We're going to move on to new business. Item number 17 is the Transportation Alternative Program grant application. Be interested in any input on this item. Commissioner Neesmith.
Well, we've done it again. We've gotten our merchants on that road very upset because we're talking about roundabouts now, again. And they haven't had an opportunity, whether you say they do or not, their perception, and perception is reality, is they have not had the opportunity to review and give feedback and be convinced that these roundabouts will work. That's their issue. Will they work? A lot of heavy truck traffic there. In fact, there are many businesses there that have truck traffic as part of their business. Some of them, the businesses are trucks. So we got to be sure that we get those businesses involved in reviewing and having input into this process, into this design.
So I just direct question to management. I know in an earlier meeting, Commissioner Neesmith and I had specifically asked for output to those commercial property owners in this zone. Do you know if that's happened already or if that's scheduled?
It has not happened yet. I know TPW has been really considering the best and most appropriate approach to make sure the reach is broad enough to capture the essence of what's in the agenda report.
Thanks, Manager Johnson. Other input on this item? Commissioner Link.
Yeah. So this is the conceptual phase, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So from what I can tell, these aren't, well, at least the two of them aren't necessarily roundabouts. They're more like glorified medians, teardrop, kind of a peanut about, or not even that. Is that correct? Like these are not the actual roundabouts where you actually go around to get to the other side because these intersections are only one way. So they're not necessarily. Yeah. I mean,
They have to be roundabouts or no one can get on it.
but you can't go all the way around. It's a teardrop.
You have to be able to.
Yeah, it's a teardrop.
So it's not like technically a full roundabout.
Yeah, the ones at the loop are teardrop.
Yeah, it's
But that's still a roundabout.
But I mean, I'll say that, you know, this is in my district and I go through these intersections several times a week and I've walked up and down this corridor and
If you came up this way,
it definitely needs help. I mean, and you've got some pretty high-speed traffic heading straight into the neighborhood and we're about to see a whole lot of development directly in this area and probably beyond, especially if we pursue the TAD that we've been talking about. So we've got to get serious about tackling this corridor. There's a lot of potential, a lot of great potential for redevelopment, important needed redevelopment, you know, even housing. So I'd like to sit down with staff just to talk about, you know, what this initial concept means. I mean, maybe Jerry and I should sit down with staff to hear the intended function. I mean, from what I can tell, it's more like a giant median than a roundabout. And I also would like to talk more about what the bike and pedestrian infrastructure looks like in this area. Because, you know, if we are going to target this area for a TAD and target it for a lot of mixed-use development, we're going to have to include some kind of infrastructure for safe bikes. And there's a way to do that with roundabouts. I was in Tallahassee last fall where they installed a roundabout that very safely incorporated allowed for bikes to merge up onto a shared sidewalk and then use the pedestrian crosswalk and then merge back into a bike lane. And I can show you all pictures of that. So yeah, I might want to reach out to staff and just sit down and hear a little bit more about this. But I'm really excited about the concept, and I'm excited about the idea of the future of Chase Street being safer and traffic calming and encouraging some really smart, very necessary mixed-use development.
Commissioner Thornton?
I don't know if we have the time, but could someone remind me or explain to me, there was I think someone told me there was a roundabout somewhere on the east side, and then we had to take it up. That's not correct?
There's a roundabout being constructed at the intersection of South Millage and Whitehall, and it was done in 2 phases, with the first phase being kind of leveling the ground to take out a hill. And so that may be kind of what you're referencing, is that the first phase didn't include the roundabout component, but included just grading. And then the second phase is the actual roundabout construction.
Because we didn't have the money to do them both at the same time.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
There's one in Ponderosa, on Ponderosa.
But that's not being.
No, it's not been taken.
Okay, okay.
If you want to see what.
Okay. All right. We're going to move on to item number 18, the GDOT Multimodal Safety and Access Grant for the West Broad Street sidewalk, which continues an existing project. Commissioner Wright?
I'm just curious why it's not called Atlanta Highway at that point. Some of the paperwork, deeper in the paperwork, just for the agenda item, deeper in the agenda item, they call it Atlanta Highway, but we're calling it West Broad Street sidewalk. I just think that might cause confusion as it.
The West Broad Street ends at the river.
Well, let's just get the paperwork to match. I don't have my professor pen here to really mark it up, but anyway, if that's the line, but I also don't want to send GDOT paperwork, maps back to slow it down, so I rest my question. I'll let it go that way.
Can staff clarify the terminus of West Broad and the initiation of Atlanta Highway for us? Commissioner Link?
I'm excited about this sidewalk. This is totally necessary. We frequently see pedestrian deaths in this area. We've seen several in my recent memory. So there's a whole bunch of housing right behind these strip mall areas. There's a whole bunch of lower income apartment housing, as well as the lots and lots of folks living on Sycamore Drive. And I think this will help folks get around a lot more safely.
Commissioner Neesmith?
Let's put this on consent.
I'm good with that.
All right. Number 18 goes to consent. Perfect. All right. Number 19, Sandy Creek Park Renovation and Development, SPLOST 2011, project number 14, and this is sub-projects 6 and 7. Any input on this side?
Yes.
Commissioner Wright?
Well, it caught my eye because last night was when I toured Bear Hollow and saw the lack of facility maintenance, and this one is talking about erosion. We're talking about moving a bathhouse, which seems really extravagant type thing, but I know compared to the conditions that these animals are living in. I was touched, you guys. I can't shake it. But anyway, I'm not going to beat this project up or anything because I know it's coming forward, but I did send a email to the manager to learn what is the hang up on some of the maintenance, that it gets so bad that they end up in these such larger numbers and stuff. And if there have been staff requests for maintenance workers in leisure services and we're not getting the message, somebody give us that message, because it seems to be a big shortage on the maintenance of leisure services. It's not just the parks, because this is now Bear Hollow's nature. So I want to make sure that our nature elements and that our facilities aren't getting, that they're getting the regular maintenance, I guess is my main plea. And so hopefully we can address that in the next year. And if there's a plea for staff member stuff, I didn't hear it, and I apologize if during the budget we didn't hear it for some reason.
Commissioner Neesmith?
I agree with everything Commissioner Wright said, as I told you guys earlier today. In fact, it was disturbing The place was built shoddily, one building at a time with the minimum amount of resources, obviously. It looks like something I'd do in my backyard.
With a permit, of course.
Of course. Well, maybe not. I'm not sure they had one. But I think that you take Sandy Creek, which is just a jewel of a park, and Sandy Creek Nature Center, fantastic places. And you take, poor old Bear Hollow that's just being held together by volunteers and baling wire. I'm disappointed that we haven't heard pleas from our staff for budgeting to take care of Bear Hollow all these years. So that's an editorial note. It has nothing to do with Sandy Creek, but yeah.
Interest in putting this item on consent?
Sure.
All right. Number 19 moves to consent as well, Gene. Number 20 is wastewater connection fees for 2 sewage systems along the west fork of Trail Creek. When one hears that agenda item, one may not immediately realize we're talking about Pine Woods and Country Corners. These are in Commissioner Thornton's district, and so this would at long last connect those two sewage systems. Commissioner Thornton, do you want to kick off conversation?
No, just consent.
Consent.
Don't we want to go home?
I got a couple of questions.
Commissioner Denson?
I did have a couple of questions. I read over some of this, and I definitely support needs to move forward. But so I was just kind of a little bit shocked by some of these discharge lagoons and how much pollution was happening there, and But one thing I was wondering about, because this is going to, for the residents in Country Corners and Pine Woods, they're going to see, I would imagine, some increased cost by having to pay for sewage. I think the estimated cost was going to be like $38 a month, I believe, if I remember that correctly.
It's about $35 a month.
$35 a month. And something I wanted to just make sure, I've had differing levels of landlords in my past. I want us to make sure that the tenants in those locations are not currently paying some kind of sewage fee already to their landlord, and that if they are, we need to somehow make sure that that fee is being dropped off once these changes are made. And whatever we need to do to make sure that's happening, because I've seen situations like that happen before, and
Attorney Berryman, just on this question, to what degree can we manage what may be a transition in billing from a private lagoon provision of septic service to public sewer access insofar as that bill that may be passed along from the landlord to the tenant?
Haven't really thought about that before. There are limitations on the abilities of local governments under the Georgia Constitution to regulate private contracts between parties. So that's why local governments can't have rent control. But, it's probably something you could ask the landlords and get more information. And then, of course, you can either not do the project or you can do it. And that's some leverage that you would have.
And just to think about our existing connections, we of course have a facility with which we have a relationship, the public library at Pine Woods. Inquiring of the library system may be a way to simply find information from a public entity about what's happening as far as the current billing structure.
Okay.
And so I'd be glad to reach out to Val at the library to see what's happening right now.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, and
Commissioner Thornton?
That was what I was going to say, pull it off the consent now. Thank you, Tim. And it goes back almost to the same conversation that we had about Dunlap. We really do need to talk to the residents before we make decisions for them. So I would like to pull it off of consent, and whatever we need to do to answer the questions that Attorney Berryman had, the point, I just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing with the residents that are going to be impacted by it. So I would pull it off of consent.
Commissioner Harrod.
Thank you. I have 3 questions. So I'm reading the report. It says that on numerous occasions over the years that the EPD data show that the discharge has exceeded permit limits on a number of occasions. Have the landlords been fined? Does anybody know?
I can find out for you.
That would be a state fine, so I
Could we find out, though, just from my interest? The second question, I suspect I already know the answer to this. So if we provide sewer, which I think is necessary because of the environmental issues here, that's going to increase the value of this land for the landowners. So I got two questions. One, can we legally prohibit, if we were to charge for the sewer, to the implementation of the sewer, could we legally prohibit those costs being passed on to the tenants? And I suspect the answer to that is no.
No.
Okay. Second question, if we go ahead and improve this, maybe it's in my paperwork here, what is this zone? Because what I would hate to happen, and we need to improve it because of the environmental issues, but what I would hate to happen is by running the sewer out there, we so increase the value of the land that these people are pushed off like the people were pushed off on North Avenue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's a concern.
One suggestion that I would have on that is basically the substantial cost of the connection fees are not being charged, and that's why the ordinance is being changed to allow that to be done for affordable housing. So you could treat it as sort of like an economic development project in reverse, and you could say if it has to be used for affordable housing for some period of time, or else the developer will be charged
Okay.
those connections.
I would like for us to figure out some way of making sure that once the value of this land is increased, which bringing sewer out there will do, that these people are not pushed off that land. And I don't know how you do that legally, but what you're saying sounds like a good idea to me.
To answer the question about zoning, I've just pulled up the map on Q Public. And so interestingly, these are zoned AR.
Wow.
That certainly gives us some leverage insofar as this is the least dense residential opportunity in the county. And so.
It's non-conforming, too.
And so non-conforming. So any modification would absolutely have to come to this body as a rezone.
That's true, but I would still like a little bit more of a lockbox tight guarantee, because as you know, development follows infrastructure. And you put the infrastructure in there, and then the pressure is going to be on that land to turn it into something else. And I want to make sure that the people that are living out there currently are not pushed off that land because the value of the land has increased so much because we've run sewer out there to address this environmental issue, which definitely needs to be addressed.
Commissioner Neesmith.
I suspect what you're going to find is that the tenants are not being billed for septage in any way, that the maintenance of those ponds is built into his costs, and he's recovering those costs with rent. So his cost of doing business is going to go down once he gets rid of those ponds. And so I don't think we're going to find a way to, maybe it goes back to the affordable housing thing. We're just going to have to find a way that he doesn't raise rents, because we're reducing his costs. And we're reducing his risks from EPD. And I think I think the tenants need to get something for that, or we do, and give it to them. So, cook on it, Bill.
Before we move on from this item, I do want to express great appreciation to Public Utilities and Management, particularly as you might examine the language in Facts and Issues, items numbers 14 and 15 in previous management and public utilities supervision iterations. It's been challenging to enter into dialogue that would allow modifications of connection fees for the purposes that are denoted here, economic development opportunity and affordable housing specifically. And so this really allows us to enter a new era about support for affordable housing, which Commissioner Neesmith just mentioned, in collaboration with our Public Utilities Department. So I applaud that we're moving forward in a big way as far as this county's policies go. So I'm excited to see that. We're moving to item number 21. This is modification to our recently approved booting ordinance, just regarding signage. This moved through government operations. Commissioner Harrod, do you want to say anything about this item?
I'm being told
We're waiting with bated breath.
briefly. I have a 4-hour disposition, thing about this. No, basically, it's there was kind of an unintended consequence when we passed the booting ordinance last year with regards to there was so much language that we were required to be on the sign that the sign ended up being a bit larger than perhaps was anticipated. So this is really just kind of correcting that. And then I have a very finicky question, which is maybe a bit tongue-in-cheek, but maybe not. So it says in the revised ordinance, if I can find it, a vehicle immobilization service must maintain a 24-hour-a-day, 365 days per year phone number. And I know that that is intended to cover everything, but obviously leap years have 366 days in them. Is that an issue with this language here?
And which day would they skip on that leap year?
Russian roulette.
I mean, it probably doesn't make any difference, but I like to be precise.
We could just make it yearly.
Okay, that works for me.
So if we made that modification in language bill to yearly, could this go on consent?
Yeah, I mean, basically they need to have somebody there 24 hours a day, every day. Period. Full stop. End of discussion.
So note that we're changing from 365 days a year to year-round, and moving this to consent. Make a note to self.
Can we have our 8:15 break?
So Commissioner Wright has suggested that this would be a marvelous time.
Let's keep moving through until we get to planning.
Because that's when he's leaving.
Whose bladder are you talking to?
We're going to respect the needs of all members of this community, whatever those should be, personally or professionally or medically. And we'll take a very brief 10-minute break.
So, you can leave.
ready?
All right, we're going to roll on with item number 22. 22 is a report from the Government Operations Committee regarding revisions to the sidewalk cafe ordinance. This originated because, of course, the sidewalks on Clayton Street are going to be wider, and so we had to determine how these wider sidewalks would interplay with our sidewalk cafe ordinance. Did we want wider cafes on the wider sidewalks, or did we want to limit their breadth? And so, Commissioner Harrod, do you want to kick off conversation about this one?
Sure. So as you mentioned, this came through government ops, and it's largely driven, as you mentioned, by the changes on Clayton Street, although this will probably serve as a model for all of downtown when we finally get to the other streets. We decided that, as the report indicates, that we wanted to require a minimum width of 5 feet for unobstructed pedestrian traffic. One of the design features on Clayton is going to be a banding strip that's in the sidewalk. We had some discussions about whether the banding strip should designate, so the banding strip will be 5 feet from the curb, and whether that should designate the width of activities taking place on the other side, but the frontage of the buildings is not a uniform distance from the curb, so that created some issues. We also wanted to look at the issue of beer bottles, glass bottles in sidewalk cafes. Well, I can't remember now. Committee members help me. Do we just talk about beer bottles or glass bottles in total? I can't remember.
Glass
Bottles in total. And then the other issue that came up was the issue of smoking in the sidewalk cafes operated by restaurants, and there is a proposal here to prohibit that, largely on the basis that people who are sitting and eating a meal are subject to smoke, which is a carcinogen coming from other people around them. So that's basically what we have here.
Commissioner Hammond?
Sure, thank you. I like most of what is here, the smoking and whatnot. My concern, though, would be the glass bottles. You know, certainly there's several restaurants downtown that, I don't know if the restaurants were brought in on the discussion, but several of them have, you know, wine bottles that are sold and such as this. I mean, I know a few years ago we had talked about this, and that was a big concern for a lot of restaurants downtown, wine bottles. I mean, certainly, you know, I can point to like the National, the Palmas, they have, does that also include if they pour a drink into a glass, what is that, you know, I mean, I don't know what that banning glass bottles means. I mean, if it means wine bottles, I certainly have a problem. I see beer being not a problem because you can pour it into something else. Wine is a little bit more difficult to do that. So, has there been any consideration for that, or any consideration to ask the restaurants how they would manage that from that standpoint?
I don't know that there has, but maybe, well,
Yeah.
maybe our staff. I honestly don't remember exactly how that discussion went. I had, in the depths of my mind, thought we had just talked about beer bottles, but it does clearly say glass bottles here, but. Because there was some discussion about wine glasses.
That's right. I think the last discussion I remember is allowing wine glasses, not the beer bottles.
But what about wine bottles?
Good question.
This is such an
I thought
It is.
I thought we had allowed wine bottles for the restaurants.
Yes, that's what I thought too.
But for the bars, it was no bottles at all. But I thought for the restaurants, we did allow wine and champagne bottles.
I remember the discussion, I just don't remember the specifics of it now, because it was several months ago.
If it's the general will of the commission to allow glass at true restaurants, but not at bars that don't meet the restaurant threshold, you know, I'd recommend that we ask the attorney to craft language that would do that.
That would be more agreeable.
Yeah.
You know, certainly, if Andy wants to get his Manhattan, they going to put it in a plastic cup for you, Andy, or are they going to
That would be sacrilege.
Can I just
Bill?
clarify? I mean, I would think that enforcing it, bottles would be prohibited, but glasses would be fine. Glasses would be fine. So I think the question is, would you want to craft it so that in restaurants, beer bottles and wine bottles are permitted? Because we do have some restaurants downtown that appear to be bars, but they qualify as restaurants. So I think there's a
There's a
an
fine
issue
line.
there. So, maybe we should craft it so that with restaurants, wine bottles are permitted, but all other bottles are prohibited. And of course, glasses are allowed.
Or perhaps, Bill, it could be, most of the ones that turn into bars late at night don't serve food late at night. So I don't know if you can, if there's food allowed in the sidewalk cafe, then you're certainly allowed a bottle in the cafe from that. I don't know. I'm making it more complicated than I should.
Well, the reason that the issue of glass bottles came up was the issue of broken glass downtown and safety. And I think what we didn't want to have happen was in bars to encourage, large numbers of glass bottles that might be being broken. But we did have a discussion about wine bottles and wine glasses, because restaurants are a little bit different from bars, and a lot of people, if you're spending $100 or something on a bottle of wine, you probably don't want to drink it out of a plastic Dixie cup.
Commissioner Wright, Dixie cups, yes or no?
Yes, not with wine. Nope. She says no. What sacrilege? I think was the term. I do appreciate you guys having. The GOC had this. It's kind of interesting. Last time the cafes were at LRC, so you guys picked up on several things that we talked about in LRC, which I think was an extensive description of what the restaurant cafe looks like. Tables, chairs, and they don't even have to be barricaded. Did I not read that in part of what you said? Which I think is great, because the grid is a good example of that. You've got tables and chairs, and it would block the sidewalk when the tables and chairs aren't there. But yet when you're in a table and chairs environment, that makes the restaurant and the ability to have glass safer, to me, than what I call, or you guys might have had a new term for the boundary area for bars, where you can just see maybe empty bottles of beer left behind that could easily tip into the sidewalk. I think making the distinction between the bar and the restaurants was done well here, and that it seems to me that we could follow the bottles, the glass for a restaurant is okay, and the bars start minimizing that, especially out on the cafes. And then I guess what I wanted to find out too was, did you guys cover the part about the street cafe or the part of the bar or restaurant that has a roof already over it? Because some of them have that roof recessed part. How did you cover that? Is that part of it's not part of a sidewalk cafe, right? Because it's got the roof. So some of the ones, the bars that are also a restaurant because of their catering and things, they don't have, from what I've seen, tables and chairs in that covered area. So that seems like the bar criteria would still work for them.
And if I can just follow up on so one of the things that we did specify is that the food, to count as a restaurant, you have to have 50% of your sales as be food, but we specified that it had to be sales of food on the premises. So if you're a bar but you're doing catering off-site,
Yes.
that doesn't turn you into a restaurant. It has to be on-site.
Right, and it doesn't turn your entry area that's roofed into the ability to have glassware, right? That's all tied into that. It's from my first glance.
The entry areas that are inside the facade of the building, those are not sidewalk cafes. They're treated as if they were just the interior space.
That's right. And then in the table and chair category, do picnic tables count? Just curious. I'm kind of big on picnic tables recently. I just want to make sure. Yeah, it would, right?
I don't know that we discussed
I mean, that's
that.
just the style that somebody puts.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
no discrimination against wood with crossed
Or metal, yeah,
support.
just want to make sure. Okay. But
Commissioner
I
Link?
like the way it's going, and I'm glad that we covered that glass part, and then the other part was the smoking in the restaurant cafe is being banned, and is that only on Clayton Street?
There's no smoking allowed in restaurants.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking of the Globe. I've been there a couple times and seen that. So but that street, that cafe, that is their smoking space, but yet they have tables and chairs, and some people eat there.
For the time being, I think what we were focusing on was crafting an ordinance simply for Clayton Street.
Okay.
So with
And
the
the-
understanding that it would then be expanded.
Okay.
But the issue of the outdoor smoking had to do with the public health issues of if you've just sat down to have a meal and somebody's next to you smoking, you've got two choices. You either inhale that smoke for half an hour or an hour, however long it takes you to have your meal,
Kill yourself.
or you get up and leave your meal on the table.
Just to be clear, the language seems to indicate that smoking is, quote, prohibited in sidewalk cafes operated by a restaurant, unquote.
That
Universe.
applies everywhere in addition to Clayton Street.
That's what I was going to, sorry.
Oh, okay. I stand corrected then.
Okay, so that leads me to how much public input, I'm picturing the public input from the food trucks once it got to the voting meeting. Remember that. So did you guys have ADDA and restaurant and bar owners at any of the GOC meetings for input?
That food truck discussion was real fun, wasn't it?
I just trying to avoid
Good
the food
times
truck
there.
thing.
Yeah.
I don't recall anybody showing up. I mean,
Okay.
it's an open agenda.
We did have ADDA members and
Yeah, there were.
And-
there was.
and also,
At least one. Yeah, Jason was there. Yeah.
Manager Johnson?
I'm sorry, Mayor, members of the commission, and also Jason Leonard came as a representative of the community downtown. And so he was during that meeting, he was the only one that actually came and offered input. But as mentioned, it is a public meeting that we advertised appropriately.
Commissioner Edwards?
I do support the smoking ban. I think smoking is a scourge of public health. It sends the wrong message downtown. I absolutely hate it when I'm walking with my son Teddy on College Avenue, and we have to walk through clouds of smoke. Teddy doesn't like it. Teddy is displeased with downtown when people are smoking close to him. So I absolutely support this action and think it's a step in the right direction.
Teddy sounds like Andy.
I'll note I had a similar conversation with the elementary age child in my house about smoking on College Square the day before yesterday. Commissioner Link?
Yeah, so I was not at the last GovOps meeting, but I see that some of the stuff that we had started to touch upon when we first addressed this 2 months ago has made it in here. And I know I think the things that we had left up in the air had to do with defining glass. And I think this captures it, but yeah, I think the intention was to allow wine, to allow glasses, so you can drink your wine out of a proper glass or your martini out of a proper glass, but to not allow beer bottles, but allow wine bottles, because it is extremely rare that you're going to see a rowdy crowd passing around a wine bottle. So I think that maybe the language does need to be clarified that wine bottles are okay. And also this idea of the banding strip. I know that my concern was that we should define the sidewalk cafe area based on the design of the sidewalk. And I missed that conversation where we had the actual folks involved in the sidewalk design there. But it sounds like that's what we're doing here, that there is an actual defined solid line on the sidewalk that you can have your cafe up to rather than having this zigzag in and out thing. So yeah, that meets my concerns.
Just to clarify, so the issue with the banding strip, as I mentioned, the sidewalk or the curb line is not parallel with the facades of the buildings.
No.
And so we, as you remember, we'd had a discussion about, well, maybe we should say, well, the sidewalk cafe can be 5 feet from, just to pick a number, from the front of the building. But then on certain parts, that would mean it would
Jut
jut
forward.
into, across the banding strip, which would not only affect the aesthetics of having the banding strip in the first place, but then it also means that the area between the end of the sidewalk cafe and the curb would be less than that 5 feet. So we decided that public access for people in wheelchairs and walking and whatever else was the most important thing to guarantee. So that's why we basically started at the curb and moved inwards. And then the discussion of glasses, we had a discussion about prohibiting glasses in bars, but then that raised the question of, okay, well, what will people drink out of? And so the obvious other thing is they will drink out of is plastic cups that then contributes to issues of trash. They're not recyclable. I mean, they are recyclable, but they're not going to be recycled. They're just going to be thrown away. So it was a kind of a balancing act. So that's kind of how we ended up where we are.
Commissioner Denson?
Yeah, and then I think another big part of this that I hope happens is by us banning beer bottles, because I think that is what we're going for, especially with the bars. I think it gives another incentive for bars to stop using bottles, which we want to do anyway, so we get rid of it and so they start going to cans because it's just easier. Because we talked about if they are serving bottles, they're going to have to pour it into a glass for the person to serve out, so obviously it gives another incentive there. I did, on the smoking though, I do wonder if, Attorney Berryman, if there's a definition of smoking somewhere else in our code, because with today, vaping needs to be probably included in there, because you also don't want to be sitting at a restaurant and have a giant cloud of cotton candy vape smoke come in your face.
The current smoking ordinance does not include vaping, so.
So somebody could vape indoors, that's fine then?
Apparently so. Yeah. Now, I don't know what I don't think the state law has been changed either.
So that might be a good thing to send to the committee.
I understand that localities have individually tackled vaping, and if somebody would be interested in that being an assignment to LRC, I'd certainly be glad to queue that up in future months.
I would, and I mean, the argument is that vaping's less hazardous to you as a smoker than a cigarette, but there is research, I think, coming out of Germany that shows that there are carcinogens in the smoke that is produced by vaping. So it may be better for the smoker, but it's not necessarily hazard-free for people that are around him or her. So I would be interested in taking a look at that.
I'm about to move on to Commissioner Hamby, but Commissioner Denson raised the reference to our ordinance that benefits those establishments that move to a greater volume of aluminum. And I just wanted to make a quick programming note that in July, that's going to move to countywide applicability from just downtown. So, Commissioner,
Yeah, I was going to mention the same thing, that we do have that incentive where people can get some off of their business license, I think, or tax occupation license for switching over to cans instead of.
The top sellers, I believe, right? And so this would actually push people to do it for
Yeah,
possibly their whole
I'm not sure.
roster.
I don't remember what it was, but I guess I'll say this, Mayor, that it seems like there's a lot of questions surrounding this issue. So maybe it needs to go back to LRC to clarify some of the things that we've talked about here. You know, certainly the glass bottles, and certainly having some restaurants aware of this. You know, does the smoking ban also apply to? I know a lot of bars that hide the sidewalk cafe. There's a lot of smoking that goes on outside in the bar area from that standpoint. So it's not necessarily around food, but it is. If it's a health hazard around food, it's going to be a health hazard around everything else too. So I don't know that was clarified.
Commissioner Neesmith had his hand up, and then I'll get back to Commissioner Wright and then Herod.
I just want to take a little deeper dive on vaping. There's also, Andy implied that it's better for smokers health-wise, but the fact is the chemicals in vaping can cause damage to the lungs.
Better is a relative term.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not getting all the tar and stuff.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, this reminded me of another topic I was hoping would be covered when this topic came back around. But I'm hoping we can move this forward. But if it gets too complicated and goes back to committee, I'm sorry. So during the day, when the bar corrals are there on a permanent basis, it's taking up valuable space where people could be walking down and enjoying the sidewalk, especially the new sidewalk. So there had been a discussion of having removable corrals so that they collapse by night. And it seems to me if there's going to be a design element that's making the 5-foot wide pedestrian banding, that we could also be working to where you have a thing that's inserted into the ground and then the baluster is attached to it and then the chains would go to the wall and give the boundary of the bar's area, because they don't have chairs and tables to define that. And that was, to me, advantageous because, one, they would be gone by day and days that they aren't open, and it will also allow street cleaning by it not being a permanent fixture. And so, did you guys cover that at all? I know David Fleck doesn't like that idea, so he might have been...
Say that again.
Huh?
Say that again. Sorry, Commissioner Hamby was bending my ear over here.
The part about how David Fleck doesn't like that idea, or the part about the collapsible corrals for the bars?
Removable corrals.
Oh,
They have some mechanism
we
embedded
had
in the
talked about
sidewalk.
them and we decided not to insist on them. I seem to recall, but
They're removed at night, when bars are active, and so there's been a problem in the past.
I was saying the mayor put this in the wrong committee. It should have been in your committee when all this.
I just see these things and they just come to mind that they could be an improvement. First of all, because on Clayton Street, all these permanent corrals have to go away for the new streetscape. So it's an opportunity for us to not have them return or them paying for the permanent fixed one because we cannot clean the streets around them. And I think the ordinance says for street cleaning, or for city, I think for the cafes, in here, they're supposed to be the type that can be cleaned. And it's not happening. If you look at any of those attachments, whether it's to the building or the sidewalk, I just think it's going to be kind of littering. But anyway, we've got a while before the streetscape happens.
Commissioner, I do recall from a previous visit to committee that talk about the removable rails had proven problematic to find some universally available fixture that could be embedded and would be, in fact, a permanent function. The other element of the conversation I do remember is that many sidewalk cafe owners have invested a lot of money in the creation and manufacture of those rails and didn't want to essentially have to dispose of them when the ground on the Clayton Street sidewalk would be replaced. The other element regarding cleaning that's probably worth noting is that the intention is to make Clayton Street a more cleanable scape, simply due to the nature of the surface that's going to be moving in the next 2 years.
Okay. I can let it rest.
Commissioner Link?
I know that some cities mandate that the people who own the property are responsible for the sidewalk in front of that property. So it might be worth discussing coming up with a policy that if you have a sidewalk cafe permit, you are responsible for maintaining that space to a certain level of cleanliness, or you can be subject to fines.
That's the way we do it now, I suppose.
I mean, suppose that's how we do it now, but
Supposed to.
maybe we need to come up with a more stringent enforcement of that.
Commissioner Dents?
And I guess I asked the managers, if I recall from our meetings, like we are in a bit of a time crunch here for the streetscape. They're wanting to get moving and this is kind of holding everything up, if I remember that correctly.
There's some opportunities to move this along.
Yeah.
So.
That's a gentle way to say it, yeah. Okay. And so I would hope that we can move through it. And also, we specifically designed this that it's only going to be Clayton Street for this certain segment. And in a lot of ways, this is working as a trial program. And if it works, we're going to put it out the rest of the downtown. So I think, I hope that we can just go ahead and pass this without having to send it to a committee for a third time before, as a trial. Yeah.
Okay. Do you mind if I just want to make one brief point about that? And I don't, I mean, all the sort of measurements and logistics that you need for the streetscaping, I don't have a problem with. What I was wondering about those policy changes, like the smoking and like the bottles, to me, that needs to be applied. If it's applied, it can't, I mean, surely we're just not going to apply it just on Clayton Street. I mean, that needs to be applied, that needs to be applied, I mean, that's,
It will.
okay.
That's the way it is in the ordinance.
Okay.
Bill?
As I was looking at this, I think there's one easy way to fix the wine bottle issue. And if you look on page 158 of the agenda, where the highlighted language says, provided, however, that glass bottles are prohibited within sidewalk cafes, we could just say glass beer bottles, and then other glassware and other types of bottles would be allowed.
Right.
So that would be a simple way to fix that.
Just add beer and life gets better.
Yes.
Well, not to reveal what I spend a lot of my time doing, but if you're going to talk about beer bottles, there's also cider bottles, because they're basically the same size as beer bottles, but they're very different from bottles for wine and sparkling wine.
Malt beverage.
Yeah.
So cider's not a malt beverage.
I mean, one way you could do it, Bill, is specify beer bottles below a certain size. Beer bottles below a certain size. Oh, excuse me, glass bottles below a certain size.
Then you get 40. Are prohibited.
Glass bottles under 40 ounce.
You do. You get 40s.
The big ones.
Commissioner Parker's looking at me like I just went crazy or something.
Well, no, I was laughing at the 40 ounce.
I'm finally going to be able to get a 60-ounce beer downtown.
I mean, I don't know whatever we come up with, there's always going to be some kind of exception, but I think what we were, the issue we were trying to address was more specifically in bars with people drinking, bottles of beer, and then the beer bottle getting dropped and broken or used as a weapon or something like that, which is less likely to happen, I think, if you're sitting at a restaurant with a bottle of wine. But if in an effort to solve the problem that has come up here, if we just restrict it to glass beer bottles, somebody's going to say, well, that's not a glass beer bottle, it's a glass cider bottle, even though it's the same size as a glass beer bottle. So maybe
How many bars sell cider?
there are bars that sell bottles of cider.
I think if we had left this to Clerk Spratling, there would be no drinking whatsoever.
So maybe, Bill, you could come up with a way that would.
Okay. I'll look at our definitions.
Should we imagine there will be some commission conversation about some slight language crafting between now and voting meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there needs to be.
Let's plan on that.
Okay.
Everybody ready to move on?
Yes.
All right, let's move to item 23, parking management agreement with Athens Downtown Development Authority. Input on this item?
Okay, which one? Where are we?
This is item number
23?
23, our parking management agreement with the ADDA.
Consent?
Consent.
Consent? Easy is as easy does. Gene, 23 moves to consent. Number 24 is an ordinance amendment regarding arrest and bail for Athens-Clarke County ordinance violations. Something long under discussion and now underway. Commissioner Denson.
Thank you, Mayor. Very excited to see this come forward and happen. And again, one of those great situations where we have our county staff and attorney's office working with individuals in the community to create great policy. My one concern, which actually, after talking to the attorney's office, I understand it, but there is a clause there that still allows officers to detain individuals for public drunkenness and be able to take them to the jail if they are a danger to themselves or to others, and I completely understand that. And I guess what I just want to bring up is maybe moving into the future that we have a better solution than the jail when it comes to that. That we have, I remember at one time, it's been a while since, but the Advanced Behavioral Health was looking into having like a sobering center as part of the new campus. where a person, if they were there sobering up, would actually have resources and people there to be able to help if there is some addiction issues or substance abuse issues. So I would just hope that that's something we look forward to. And I guess I haven't looked through, but Attorney Berryman, does the language say specifically jail on that part where, or just detain? That's the one thing I was worried about, if it specifically said they had to be taken to the jail. And
It says detained, so it doesn't specifically require jail.
Okay, that's good.
Other input? Commissioner Harris?
Thank you. So I too think this is a good move forward, and I support it. I do have one technical question, though. So on the bottom of page 177, top of 178 on the PDF, so it says, notwithstanding subsection 1 above, a person may be detained for any offense in the ACC code when the person, A, fails to identify him or herself satisfactorily, B, refuses to sign the citation after the law enforcement officer explains what it is, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, C, has previously failed to appear in response to a citation, summons, or other legal process in the Athens-Clarke County Municipal Court. If this happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, how does an officer know whether somebody has previously failed to appear in response to such a thing?
There's a warrant.
The officer will get if there's a person who has an ID, the officer will call into the 911 center. They will then run the GCIC records and the local municipal court records that show that an arrest order has been issued for that individual.
Okay, and how frequently are those records updated?
They're updated as soon as the court gets a notice, or if a person does not appear, the way the process works, the court usually just sends a letter for the first time, gives the person another opportunity to appear. So if it's the second or third time when the person fails to appear, the judge issues a warrant. That then goes to the clerk, and that information immediately goes out to the GCIC center.
Okay, so if I've not shown up for my court date, how long between me not showing up for my court date and me being stopped downtown for doing something that I shouldn't have been doing? What's the window there in which a police officer would know whether or not I had showed up to court?
Well, the court would send a notice before issuing an immediate arrest order. But once that order is issued, I would say within a day.
Okay.
It's going to be at the 911 center, and they can run the records.
Other input on this item? Folks want to move this to consent?
Sure.
Yes. All right. Perfect. Number 24, Gene, moves to consent. Number 25, adoption of the FY20 operating and capital budget and establishment of our property tax rates and other purposes. Anyone want to have any other input on the budget other than the work session conversations we've had thus far? Commissioner Wright.
I just wanted to make sure that my question, on our last time we talked about here, I was asking about learning when the rates, the property values go up like they have on this time that has gotten enough chatter. How often are the appeals granted to where what we're thinking we're going to get doesn't come in because of the appeals? I'm not sure if it's possible to learn that.
Could management check with the tax assessor's office and give us, say, a 5-year historic snapshot of the number of appeals, well, the number of parcels annually noted in the tax digest, the number of appeals, and then the number of appeals granted?
And the value.
And the value of those appeals relative to the overall digest? Okay.
Yeah, the effect that could happen so that so we have a gauge on that.
The question is, there's a threshold that the tax assessors has to report to the Department of Revenue before the digest is approved. And I think that's the question you're asking is, what impact do a lot of pending appeals have on getting the digest approved?
Yeah, thank you for capturing what I was looking for, but I just want to, whatever they can bring forward, so we may be prepared. I know that the valuations have to be plus or minus 5% of the predicted value. I know that we can't not keep assessing, but then the appeals process is there for a reason. So I want to understand how effective the appeal process is, because it would affect what we have predicted to come forward in October.
Commissioner Hamby?
Sure. And I look forward to more discussion at our voting session about the budget, but there are a couple items that I know we've talked about. One recently here tonight about the lease arrangements, $40-something thousand, and then also at our work session the street lighting issue. To remember, we had 20 street light requests that were backlogged, and perhaps plan for more during the year to at least get that ball rolling for where we've had requests coming from on that part. And I'd be interested in this. I see where Commissioner Wright's going about the property values, the assessed values going up, and I understand that a lot of surrounding counties are the same situations happening. I don't know if staff has time to put together just some information about how we compare to the surrounding counties when it comes to the assessed value. I know we're not raising the millage rate or anything like that, but certainly what Oconee, Jackson, I've heard it's gone up quite a bit, and some others, just so that we can have that information as well.
Certainly. And that is something that the Finance Department prepares prior to really the start of the budget process, and as we get through doing that analysis. So I'll make sure that they update a document, and we'll share that. With
I
you
know
all.
they give us the millage rate for each of those different areas, but what's the percentage of what's their sort of average assessed value of those communities looking at? Yeah.
Commissioner Neesmith?
I just wanted to clarify, I thought I heard Commissioner Wright ask about the impact on revenues of appeals, not the tax digest approval, but on the revenues through the year. I think that's what I heard her ask.
That was similar to my perception. You were interested, Commissioner Wright, in knowing, if I understand it right, because of appeals, does that somehow limit revenue?
And by how much?
Yes, it
Is
could
that your
if
question?
the appeals are granted. And we're thinking, if my property went up $65,000, I'm appealing it. I'm hoping that it's really not going to stay at that rate. And these assessments are what we're banking the property tax value
That
to
drive
be.
our revenue projections.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so anyhow, that information I'd be interested in. Commissioner Denson?
I again just want to push for us to go ahead and, as part of this budget, start setting up, as part of the offender incentive program, having a $4 compensation per day that inmates provide labor to the county. And I guess I'd ask the manager's office to come up with a number that we think would be the cost for that, to have that applied for FY20, so that we can see about possibly having that put in there.
Commissioner Parker, is it?
Thank you. I'd also like to speak in support of some sort of compensation for the inmate laborers. I know we've talked about some of the complications of having money within the jail, but I still think having a fund for them to have access to upon release so that they can get their lives right is still the most ethical choice moving forward, and I hope that we can continue conversation with that as we approach voting on all of this in June.
All right, if there is no other input on item number 25, discussion of our FY20 budget, we're going to go ahead and move on to our two planning and zoning items. So I am going to shift, push my chair back.
This is good. I didn't get to read it.
Where are you?
I didn't get this on the agenda.
Yeah, I talked to them, they're not going to.
No, they're not.
No, they're not interested in that. They want, they want experience. So, I don't know.
We have to trust Brad.
I mean, maybe you like push for that?
While we're getting set up, I'll remind commissioners, audience members here in the chamber, and then those watching at home, that we now have an opportunity for 3 minutes of citizen input on each planning and zoning item, and that follows the presentation from our planning director, Brad Griffin. And so I see he's got queued up the first of our 2 items regarding 664 Hancock Industrial Way.
All right, thank you, Mayor. 2 items for you tonight. The first is a special use in an employment industrial zone located at 664 Hancock Industrial. This is we consider RV parks of this nature to be commercial outdoor recreation. If that commercial outdoor rec has overnight accommodations, it is a special use within our employment and industrial areas, largely to ensure compatibility with other existing permitted uses. If we're in an industrial or an employment industrial area, we want to ensure that this type of use is appropriately located so as not to negatively impact either existing industries or existing undeveloped properties suited for industry. In this case, 169 lots on an 18-acre tract. This particular tract is right on the edge of our employment industrial zone. I'll show you that in a minute, and has a large environmental area that runs through the center of it that makes large-scale development potentially difficult to do from an industrial standpoint, but it is something to keep in mind. If approved, binding plan application, report and architecture, as with all special uses. You see the property here located just on the east side of Hancock Industrial. I think what is unique about this property as it relates to considering a special use is that the yellow RS-15 property that you see across the lower end and then all the way up the right-hand side is a large existing residential community that is immediately adjacent to this employment industrial zone property. You can see there from the picture, especially to the right, many of those homes are within just a matter of feet from the property line. And so a purely traditional industrial type operation could be very significant in terms of an impact on this residential. In this case, Planning Commission felt like that this type of a use on this property actually serves probably as a good transition into the industrial area from this existing community. For those of you that are familiar with Bulldog Park, that's Bulldog Park really just across the street and over with Phase 2 that has recently been constructed and sold here. This is our recycling facility. Here's the overall site plan. You see the large area that's left in the center is largely environmental areas and low, and I'll show you a picture of that, but you see the proximity. Did want to make one correction, and we will have it corrected in the ordinance and through a memo before you're asked to vote on this in June. Your pink sheet and your report that we sent to you indicates that the Planning Commission supported our original first condition, which was the removal of these 8 lots. The Planning Commission, in fact, removed that condition and was satisfied that those lots were appropriate in that location. So the elimination of those 8 lots will not be part of what you're being asked to vote on, and we apologize for that oversight. You can kind of see here the way the land falls to the center and then moves back up. And the recommendation from the Planning Commission, given the items noted above, the nature of this, because of its specific location and the character of the property, they felt like was appropriate. They did have conditions included, some restrictions on how large the accessory structures, that oftentimes these types of facilities, people will buy a lot to park their RV, and then they'll buy an adjacent lot to do kind of an outdoor pavilion type shelter for entertaining while they are there. Do need some restrictions on those because they can get extremely large if we don't place some limits. There are maximum stays of no more than 30 days at a time. We do allow for 90 days in the fall for football season between September 1 and the end of November. And then a couple of other conditions you see listed there as well. But with those conditions in place, Planning Commission is recommending that this special use be approved.
All right, now we'll take an opportunity for citizen input. Again, 3 minutes per item. Seeing none, we're going to come behind the rail. In Commissioner Parker's district.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I met with these developers a few months ago to discuss this project and had a lot of questions for them regarding community benefits. As we all know, we are a community that's somewhat housing stressed, and this is going to be catering to people who are visiting Athens, not really meeting any of our needs for additional housing at various income levels. I asked them about opportunities for employment for local folks, and they indicated that this project would not be generating very many jobs as well. Going back to the number of the use of the space as an RV park and whether or not there was some possibility of having longer stays or some component here that is meant to be more like housing related rather than recreational. I guess given this rezoning, particularly the condition that the maximum stay is 30 days, Brad, the Planning Commission has sort of decided that this is a specifically non-residential.
Specifically non-residential and within these employment and industrial zoning districts.
Yeah.
Many uses permitted. One of the uses that is very clearly not permitted at all is permanent residential housing because of the impact potentially on an existing industry. So yes, this is intended to be temporary in nature. The RVs come, the RVs leave, and they are not permanently set up there.
Thank you. So with that, I understand that there's not a lot of other kinds of uses that are best fit for this particular area, but with the other drawbacks noted, I am currently torn as to whether this is the best project for my district. And particularly having spoken to a number of residents about the project proposal, none of whom seemed very welcoming for it. So I am hoping to get some more community input in the coming weeks to decide how is this best going to benefit District 2, if at all, and go from there.
Commissioner Lake?
Yeah, I mean, upon first glance, I was kind of excited about this project because I was like, at long last, here's an opportunity for folks to find a place to park their tiny homes. I understand the Bulldog Park element of it and the RVs that are coming and go for football weekends, but I've done a lot of camping, and ended up in places like this with my tent, but there are lots of RVs there where people actually are living there year-round or at least for extended periods. RV living is a form of affordable housing. And I'm not inclined to approve an RV project that doesn't at least have some opportunity for that kind of year-round living, especially considering that we do have a pretty vocal tiny house community, and we have nowhere for people legally to park their tiny homes in Athens-Clarke County. And this, on paper, would be an opportunity to do that, but it sounds like the Planning Commission has actually put restrictions on that opportunity.
I think, just from a clarification standpoint, the time periods that they're allowed to stay really fall into the way this is classified under the existing zone as a commercial outdoor recreational facility and not permanent residence.
Is there sewer?
There's sewer out there, and it's an industrial zone.
Should be.
Yeah, there should be sewer in the industry zone.
I mean, what becomes a little bit tricky with this one is that if you were to get into, because it's a special use and not a planned development, you really don't have the same latitude as an elected body to change the use. I mean, that's the same restrictions that are placed on Bulldog Park across the street. In order for us to qualify it as commercial outdoor recreation, which is a use permitted in the zone under special use, you've got to place those time restrictions on.
So this conforms to the zoning with the special use permit?
Yes, and when Bulldog Park went in across the street, it was a by right use at that point. There was not a special use. we later came back and presented a text amendment to this group to include if the commercial, because commercial outdoor recreation can be anything from this to a golf course. If the commercial outdoor recreation includes overnight accommodations, then we felt it was important for the protection of the industries that are out there to evaluate each one on a case-by-case basis and ensure that it's not a use that moves in, people begin to live there on a permanent basis, and then they're complaining about the concrete plant that's across the street that is there by right in an area that was really set aside for that type of a use. I think what makes this one a little unique is the existence of the residential community adjacent to it. As a buffer. I think if this type of a use were in the middle of the Athena Industrial Park on a piece of property that was surrounded by other industrial properties that were undeveloped, I think we would have strongly been opposed to it, at least from a staff recommendation, because of the impacts that it has on land that we have zoned for those types of operations that would probably go somewhere else if they were looking at developing next to residential.
I would suggest, in the pursuit of amending our code to encourage more affordable housing, we somehow talk about this kind of use, especially when it's adjacent to this industrial zone. I mean, if the industry starts to be a burden to folks who are living in a tiny house on wheels, then they have the option to move that house, which isn't necessarily the case if you're living in an actual stick-built house. I don't know. I feel like this is an opportunity that's getting away from us.
I think part of the issue that we've run into with the tiny house advocates, I mean, somebody could bring forward a project just like this under a planned development and ask for consideration to do this with tiny homes. Where it breaks down generally with our experience is you can do it, but all 170 of those lots are going to be sold for large amounts of money, more than likely. Generally, the tiny home people are not necessarily looking for a long-term investment on a place to locate their house. They're looking for a place to park it for a while at a very low
Sort of
cost.
a long-term lease.
You got to have a way for a developer to make, a living doing this type of a project before they're going to go out and build it just to allow people to park on the property. So it can be done through the PD process. Our ordinances allow it, but it's the challenge is with the financial end of it that we generally, this would be these would be sold as individual condo lots.
Speaking of surrounding industry, it seems like a pretty lengthy 3 paragraphs of feedback from solid waste. They seem to be, can you speak to that? They're concerned about their operations, people complain about it when they really need to operate more. Tell me more about that.
I mean, I think what you've heard in there from the solid waste department is exactly the reason that we try to be extremely careful with this in terms of placement. And it is across the street from a proximity standpoint and over a little bit, you can see there. So we got into the issue of balancing impacts to the recycling facility that was there first. Versus the potential impacts if and when this property is developed in a fashion that was permitted by right as an industrial operation. And it could be within 20 feet of that rear property line and 20 feet from those homes by right. You wouldn't see it. It would go straight through the permitting process. There may be a small buffer required, but certainly not anything substantial given what's allowed in an industrial zone or an employment industrial zone. So
Gotcha.
This one wasn't easy from a staff recommendation going forward. We were really in both camps at one point.
Yeah.
And I think what tilted us on it largely was the presence of the existing community.
And then the next question is, because of this unique request, I guess what you're saying is it's a use, for us to deny it and not be in legal trouble, Bill, aren't there some things that we maybe should be reminded as far as we have to have a technical reason to deny versus?
This is a little bit different from a special use.
Okay.
This is an ordinance adoption. You do have to go through the balancing test that the staff has in here.
Okay.
And apply those factors that are in there.
Commissioner Neesmith, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I just, I'm sorry, Melissa, I don't see this as an opportunity. This is a person who's trying to develop a piece of property and make money in a particular way. If we try to encumber or change it, it's not going to work for him. And so I don't think we should try to, make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. It is what it is. I think if we could, man, it'd be great if we had a developer come in and say, I'm looking for a place to develop tiny houses. That'd be great. But that's not what this is. This is an RV park, period. I know people that are interested in it. They're going to buy lots. And that's what he's after.
Commissioner Davenport?
I just got a quick question for, how does the 30 days work? So an RV park's there for 30 days or 90 days, then they leave, like for one day, they can come back and do another 30 days, or is there a...
I mean, generally, our position on it has been, and it's as much of an internal policy with us when the first one went across the street, that they are required after 30 days to leave the premises and be gone. It's a hard thing to enforce. What you will see within these communities, I think this one has one, and I know Bulldog Park does across the street, they will enforce those fairly vigorously themselves because they don't want this to turn into a place where people live on a permanent basis, and it starts to change character. And we did extend it out through football season for the 90 days the one time, but and we've had requests to do that for other seasons too. That was a policy that we established with Bulldog Park. What I have told Bulldog Park across the street, that if you, as the elected body, were to approve this and you felt a desire or to modify those time limits, whatever was ultimately granted here, I would grant the same provision across the street to Bulldog Park. If you extended the time, now if you made it shorter, I've kind of given them what they've already got, but if you were to extend it out to longer periods of time, I would certainly afford the one across the street the same opportunity.
Commissioner Edwards?
Could someone explain to me an RV park? I mean, what, these folks come and go and
Yeah,
live
they
all
come here
over the
to
country?
watch football.
Okay.
Or baseball, or
Or
basketball.
baseball or
leave
basketball, yeah.
Okay.
It's like an Airbnb, but it's property.
I mean, these were basically the result. I mean, for example, in the 80s and early 90s, what was the commuter parking lot then over by Stegman was where all the RVs came on the weekends.
Okay.
They're not allowed to be there anymore, and they had to start finding other locations. This basically, for these people, they will come in and buy one or two of these lots as condominium type of ownership. They own it. It's transferable. If they want to sell it, then it's their place to come park their RV when they want to. Very similar to what we have on Oak Street with
Tailgate
the
station.
tailgate station with the condo parking spaces.
Yeah, which is a supreme waste of space.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, I just got to the part where they're outlining how they're going to have security cameras to enforce the 30-day overstay. It's a nice little description of how they're going to cover that, because they said the other people move, they have two lots and they'll move the RV to this one, that one. But anyway, he's addressing that as well as making sure the people who buy understand the recycling center and the industry.
Commissioner Davenport?
But my question is about the 30 days. So like, I buy a lot, stay 30 days. I can go park my car in Walmart, then, or my RV in Walmart, then the next day go back and do another 30 days, right? Okay.
And just one more question. With this environmentally sensitive area running down the middle of this parcel, I mean, what else could be done here in this industrial zone?
I mean, you've got probably, 5 or 6 acres of otherwise developable.
Okay.
Back here, and that's part of our concern is the area behind it is larger than the area in front of it. It's 18 acres total. You could put any kind of a manufacturing facility on the back side and cross it in the same manner that they're showing it crossing there.
Over a bridge.
over a bridge and put a large, fairly large, assembly or light manufacturing operation within a few feet of the property line.
And when this property is assessed, they'll look at the sales of each condo unit and multiply it, whatever, right?
Each condo unit will be assessed.
Okay, yeah.
Pretty simple.
Condo pad.
Just thinking about this in terms of the balance of other uses under consideration, especially the questions about the tiny home. I do want to go back and reference the assignment that's currently in front of the Planning Commission, and then by virtue of that, in front of planning staff, and that does have us look at minimum lot size and minimum structure size as well. So that's an open question that planning is dealing with. So I don't want anyone to have the impression that that's not part of their broader work.
Would you call Paula? You call Paula, please.
I think I emailed the charge to Paula.
Emailed her
Yes.
too.
Yes.
I've had discussions with her.
Commissioner Link.
Brad, could you rattle off some of the uses in this zone, the currently allowed uses in this industrial zone? Are there like some commercial retail, like store, other kinds of uses allowed?
Most of your retail, restaurant, those types of uses, more purely commercial, are going to be restricted at, I believe, 10,000 feet per on the use. So
Small scale.
It would be,
allows-
it's really not intended to be a large strip center in the area, but it does afford those commercial types of uses up to a certain size. Really, because this is employment industrial, the only two uses that really just jump out as that would not be permitted would be heavy manufacturing, which is delineated from light, and you're bringing in a purely raw material and turning it into a product. So, pulpwood, those types of things where would be considered heavy and would not be
But
permitted here.
small scale kind of artisan manufacturing.
But any of the existing industries that are along Olympic Drive currently, or
pub.
Athena,
Or brewery.
a larger scale brewery, one that's not necessarily, one that is purely wholesale distribution and shipping versus, a small scale where you can come in and sit down.
What about medical office?
You could do medical office.
All right, I think we're going to move on now to item 27, 393 North Finley Street.
Okay. This is an amendment to an existing commercial downtown plan development that was approved back in the 90s, 393 North Finley. When this was originally approved in the late 90s, this was an extension of the commercial downtown zone, jumping Finley Street for one lot, went in under a PD. There was a specific list of uses. All those uses came out of our ordinance that was in place at the time, pre-2000, so it was a very different setup. You all in your reports, and I noticed this afternoon on my way over here, it looks like that one of your sheets of the attachment, the old original 99 ordinance that we provided you with, there should have been a third sheet of uses. You'll see your uses that were permitted skipped from C all the way to AA or BB. So I will get you the rest of those uses too, but essentially, it allowed things like restaurants, the other things that would have been permitted in the commercial downtown in the 90s. At that point in time, the trend towards the smaller bottling operations, the brew pubs, those things, what we called a bottling plant in the 90s was a very different use than what we call a bottling plant today, just given the nature of the brewing industry. And so really what the property owner here is interested in pursuing, because bars were specifically not listed in the original PD, nor were bottling plants. An operator that wanted to go in and have a small brew pub on this property, neither one of those two uses were permitted under the old ordinance. Because both of those uses were specifically listed in the 90s in the text of specific zones, but were not in the ordinance that was adopted, I didn't have any authority to make an interpretation that, well, it's really close to what's going on anyway, so we can do that. But they were specifically prohibited 20 years ago when this was done. So what this really boils down to is a request to expand the list of permitted uses on the property. No site changes at all being proposed to it. Big City Bread, corner of Meggs and Finley. This was the plan approved back in the 90s. Site, there is some parking on site along the Meggs frontage you see there on the right. Planning Commission felt like it was appropriate. There was some discussion. The recommendation on no loading on Meggs Street came from our Public Works Department. That's on Meggs Street. I mean, they can pull into the parking area along Meggs Street and load and unload, but there was concern because we do have some residential homes just to the rear of this property that when they say no loading on Meggs, it was delivery trucks parking in the street and idling while they're unloading. So that was a condition. And then parking lot screening along Meggs, there's a small planting area that's really intended to be the smaller hedge that just provides a little bit of separation between a pedestrian and the parking area. With that, Planning Commission recommendation was to approve.
Yeah, I mean, this seems like a pretty straightforward, perfectly reasonable request.
Commissioner Link, I apologize. I
Sorry.
failed to provide opportunity for public input.
Oh,
The
sorry.
applicant is here. Carl?
This is very brief, and I'm last and hopefully least of this evening's work that y'all have done so graciously. Carl Martin, I live at 797 North Pope Street in Athens. This is a twofold request. It's really simple. It's clarification of zoning language. The zoning, as Brad said, was changed in 2000, 2 years after we did our PD. And so we're just trying to catch up to some approved uses that are already allowed in the downtown zone that seem appropriate for what we want to do. So, that's really it. And to add a few to our list that are already listed, that's the hostel, the bed and breakfast, and bottling plant. So if you have any questions, I'm here for the duration.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Apologize, Commissioner Link.
Yep. I mean, I think he summed it up. This is pretty straightforward, just catching up with the current code, I guess, and the uses of I mean, I remember when Big City Bread first went in, and it was kind of a new thing to have an outdoor patio like that, and now it's kind of just what you do. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to expand these uses to conform with the existing code.
Input on this side? Just as we close, I'll note, I remember being in what I used to consider the saddest, dreariest thrift store that was at this location prior to Big City Bread, where I thought all items rejected from other thrift stores went to live or die. So with that, hope everybody has a great evening, and that wraps.